Olney. He's the co-founder of SaveOurWallets.org. He's also a senior advisor at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. We're going to be talking about the market structure bill and where that may or may not be headed. We're also going to have Frank Corva, independent journalist and publishing across a lot of different outlets, here to talk about the new potential candidate for New York Attorney General who wants to apparently scrap the very infamous bit license in New York. Before we jump and bring Kyle here up on screen, we're going to start out with a little bit of a preface to what we're going to talk about with Kyle. And this is around President Trump backing the crypto market structure bill. So President Donald Trump voiced strong support for Bitcoin and crypto legislation on February 2nd, speaking from the White House following a policy meeting tied directly to the final push on the U.S. crypto market structure reform. Trump said he hopes the bill is completed so he can sign it into law, calling himself a big crypto person and emphasizing his belief in the industry. Let's go ahead and take a look at the video.
Other than, I'm a big crypto person. I'm the one that probably helped crypto more than anybody because I believe in it. And the reason I believe in it is because if we don't do it, Scott, I think we can say then China's going to do it. Right?
Well, we certainly know Trump is a big crypto person, having made billions off of his own shitcoin token release and his wife's. But hey, we'll let that slide under the rug for now and move on. The White House meeting was not ceremonial. It came as Congress moves from debate into formal rule writing, with market structure legislation advancing through committee markups. The administration's involvement signals coordination between lawmakers, regulators, and industry leaders to align policy before a final bill reaches the president's desk, if it does ever make it there, aiming to avoid jurisdictional conflicts and last-minute obstacles. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent reinforced that message during the meeting, framing the recent crypto policy efforts as part of a broader strategy to make the United States the global hub for digital assets. He pointed to progress on stablecoin legislation and ongoing work on market structure clarity, describing the effort as bringing U.S. best practices to a rapidly expanding digital asset and innovation economy. Let's go ahead and watch the video of Treasury Secretary Bessent as well.
You've made America the digital asset capital of the world. We did the Genius Act for stablecoins. Many of the people standing up here are working on the Clarity Bill to
I hope it gets done.
Market structure,
yeah.
And we're bringing U.S. best practices to an exciting new industry, digital assets, innovation, and it spreads everywhere. So the U.S.
And do you agree that?
All right. Now, the market structure bill is expected to clarify how digital assets are classified, define regulatory oversight, and establish consistent rules for trading, custody, and market infrastructure. For years, the lack of clear rules has driven enforcement by lawsuit and regulatory uncertainty, a dynamic widely viewed as holding back U.S. innovation and capital formation. Now, taken together, the remarks of Trump and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent mark a clear shift in tone from the executive branch. Bitcoin and crypto are now being treated as core financial infrastructure, not a fringe policy issue. For markets, the signal is increasingly clear. Regulatory clarity is moving from talk to execution, hopefully, with the White House openly positioning itself to sign comprehensive crypto legislation into law. Now, to give us the real deal and the inside scoop here from inside the swamp, I'd like to go ahead and bring up Kyle Olney. Let's bring Kyle up on the stage here. Kyle is working with BPI as a senior advisor. He's also the co-founder of the SaveOurWallets.org campaign. Kyle, how you doing? And, tell me of what I just said, how much is not likely to actually materialize?
Well, thanks for having me, Walker. I'm glad to be here, even if I'm coming to you from the swamp.
I won't hold it against you.
Yeah, exactly. Fun place to be working at the moment. But yeah, overall, I'm doing okay in America. It's been a hell of a week from a news perspective on all fronts. I'm excited to hear your take on Epstein and all the latest release here in the next couple hours. But yeah, from the policy side in Washington as it relates to market structure, the last few weeks have been incredibly chaotic, as anybody who's been watching from the outside would see. I think what you're seeing from these statements from the White House and a lot of the participants at the moment are earnest in the sense that, like, they are hopeful that they're going to be able to get something done for the crypto community. Again, we'll use air quotes for the crypto community. But I think the realities on the ground are starting to weigh quite heavily on all of the participants and the players here. Again, I've been in Washington over the last 6 to 12 months, pretty consistently, having meetings with congressional offices and staff members and the people who are writing this bill, and they just look exhausted. I mean, I was out there a few weeks ago before the last markup in the banking committee got canceled, and these guys were just, I mean, they looked like they wanted anything. They just want it over. They just want to like get something that the president can sign and call a success, and then just walk on. So I would say it's pretty tortured at the moment, and I'm happy to get into all the details on how it's being tortured and sort of where we expect things to actually land here.
Yeah, and maybe before we kind of jump into where we think things are going to go, can you give just a little bit of a breakdown of what is actually in this bill? Because I think there's a couple different components to it, and different factions sort of care about different things, whether it be some of this ruling on stable coins or various, providing additional clarity on crypto assets or the developer protections. Can you talk kind of about the different facets of this bill and sort of who the parties are that are sort of pushing for each? Because they do seem to be relatively distinct in certain areas. There is overlap as well, but can you give us sort of the lay of the land about the bill?
Yeah, happy to. So I think this is actually maybe one of the reasons that they're encountering as much difficulty trying to push something through Congress now as they are, because the strategy that they took to, this market structure bill was this giant omnibus, like 30 different sets of constituents who all had competing priorities, all rolled into one. And they were just thinking that they were going to railroad it through, right? And the biggest kind of financial legislative reform since the Securities Act of, the early 1900s. So, clearly the US government is in such good shape these days with its governing capabilities that we were going to be able to do this giant 100-year, bill that was going to fix everything for modernizing the financial economy. But clearly that was going to be difficult from the start. And the reason that is the case is because, over the last 15 or 17 years, as, the crypto markets have, developed on their own with no formal guidance or legislation from, Congress, they have basically become a competing power center to the traditional finance and kind of Wall Street community bank industry, right? And so even at the just highest level of this legislation, you have kind of a deadlock between the old world and the new world, right? People who believe in software and technology and blockchains and the ability to operate a more efficient economy. People who believe that you should have access to your money 24/7, 365 because, hey, it's yours. And it just lives in a database anyway. Like, why should there be artificial barriers between me and my money? And, kind of the banker's hours, kind of 10 to 4, only open 5 days a week, and charging you, 5.5 points on, a loan when, they're only paying you, a quarter of a point in interest if you put it on, reserve with them at a traditional bank. So the first kind of layer of the problems in this bill were TradFi versus what we'll call it DeFi for lack of a better term, but the blockchain native sort of technologists who are out there. That's the first layer of competition, and that's where we see the bill really getting hung up at the moment. It hasn't even progressed past the first layer of political sort of infighting necessary to get something effective. And then there's, other layers that we could get into, further downfield, which are like, what does a decentralized blockchain actually mean, right? From a congressional perspective, like the entire DeFi industry, everybody who's trying to do this new composable 24/7, 365, banking industry in, kind of the crypto ecosystem, they don't even all have aligned interests, and they don't even all share the same philosophies and opinions about how to proceed. There's kind of internecine squabbles between these different blockchains about who qualifies as a commodity versus a security, and who is actually decentralized and who is not decentralized and who may become decentralized in the future. That's another layer of concern for everybody in this debate. And then I would say from a Bitcoin perspective, in particular, which I know is near and dear to your and my heart, as hardcore Bitcoiners, like what we really care about in this market structure bill is developer protections. We care about not seeing people who are writing non-custodial, freedom and privacy preserving software code. We don't want them going to jail the way that they've been getting prosecuted by the DOJ and thrown in jail in the cases of the Samurai devs or the Tornado Cash devs, or in the case of any of the developers who are out there trying to build, again, what I would qualify as critical and necessary technology for this kind of blockchain enabled world that we're moving into. That is another layer that has now become very controversial, let's say, in Washington, because the majority of the people who sit in Congress are too old to understand both the technology itself and I would say have kind of lost the plot when it comes to kind of core American values, that the developer protections are meant to, kind of ensconce or anchor into law. So I know I just said a ton, so I'll pause there and let you choose where you want to dig in.
Yeah, so thank you for the background on that, because I think it is really helpful for people to understand exactly what we're dealing with here and kind of the interplay of all of these different special interests, for lack of a better word. And maybe let's start kind of with where you finished up, which is, again, as you said, the part of this that is most near and dear to the hardcore Bitcoiners like ourselves and a lot of the people watching this right now, the thing we care about the most, which is developer protections. And that's not just for Bitcoin developers, that's for any open source developer. Like, I don't care if you're an open source developer on Ethereum either. Like, I think Ethereum's a shitcoin, but I still, will defend your right to write open source software, with every breath I have. And so, I would again encourage people, as we've done many times on the show, go to billandkeone.org, sign the petition for Samurai. These guys, this was just such a ridiculous story, and maybe we can get into some of that a little bit later. But let's talk a bit about why we're actually seeing resistance from Washington on this particular fact, because to me, this seems like the part of this bill that is most aligned with the American ethos, that is most aligned with the freedom of speech, that is most aligned with, basically the basic protections that are provided in our Constitution, or purportedly so. And so, why are we seeing, is the rejection of this part of the developer protection sort of bipartisan? Is it coming from one particular angle? Where are we seeing this, and what's the actual justification that they're giving for saying, hey, we don't want this? Is it just Bitcoin is used by criminals and thus these guys are criminals for writing code? How deep do they actually go into their kind of rebuttal of this part?
Yeah, so this is again such a deep and nuanced sort of area just on its own, right? That this could probably be its own hour if we really got into the nuances of it. But to give it a high level overview, what I would say is that, for better or worse, the majority of the people that we speak to in congressional offices understand that this is something that needs to exist, and that these are American values, right? Like, code is speech for most of these people. They do understand that, like, if you're not taking possession of something, which is like the non-custodial code part of the developer protections that I think are fairly non-controversial, that you shouldn't be treated as a regulated intermediary. I think that that's pretty obvious to most, let's say, honest or kind of forthright actors who are involved in the debate. I think where we're getting twisted around the spokes a little bit, as is classically the case in kind of the post world, or the post September 11th world that we live in, for instance, is that we see a lot of people using the shield of kind of counterterrorism as the excuse for why it is that we can't have fully unmonitored, or kind of in their view, free for all kind of systems that exist out there that are not being controlled effectively by the US government, right? The regulatory regime that we've been in since September 11th with the Bank Secrecy Act is one of total surveillance, right? I mean, you have no expectation of privacy engaging with a bank today in the United States of America. Like, that is just the reality of where we are in the political moment. And it's worth mentioning that that is an irregular and ahistorical phenomenon, right? Like, for the overwhelming majority of both human history and American history, you had a full expectation of privacy with private third parties, right? And it's only in the last couple decades, as the Supreme Court has chipped away at those rights, that we've gotten into the shape that we've gotten into. So basically, today, the kind of people who are pushing for the stripping out of developer protections are people like Chuck Grassley, who is 92 years old and is the Senate pro tem, right? I mean, I think a lot of us would have objections to the fact that a 92-year-old who, I'm just going to guess, probably is not super familiar with the technology, is kind of holding this up and, kind of pushing in a direction that is not, I think, in accordance or in alignment with the broad majority of, Americans and their constituents. Like, that's a problem, right? And, the problem that we have, again, is that, there are a lot of security and terrorism oriented people in Congress who either have not done, their homework to understand what's actually going on, and they're just kind of believing sound bites that they're told about this is going to make the country less safe, or we cannot tolerate this, like this is going to open the door to dangerous people and dangerous things that we cannot countenance here in the US, or they're people who are, again, in my opinion, probably just bad faith actors, right? They don't care that the reality is that nothing bad can be done by the writers of non-custodial open source software code. They don't care that it's just an expression of free speech. They don't care that it violates historical American norms and standards, because that is not anything that we have been particularly concerned about upholding since September 11th.
I mean, Kyle, I've got to say this, I try to keep a pretty even keel, but this sort of thing just kind of enrages me a bit, because you've got these, and I'm not trying to be ageist here, but you've got like 92-year-old guys who probably can't open a PDF without their staffers helping them, and they're basically writing the regulations that are that are stripping away people's basic liberties that we are supposed to have. As you said, this is a historic aberration. This isn't something that was always the case. I mean, before the digital era, privacy was kind of assumed in transactional senses, because everything was done truly P2P. It was done in physical specie, person to person. It was, done in cash or in gold or in maybe even silver. This is not something that America was founded on. It's quite the opposite. And it's rather frustrating that you see these politicians who are trying to posture and claim that they're pro freedom and pro liberty and pro everything else, pro whatever talking point they're given for the day. And yet on this basic thing, they just reveal themselves as being completely hollow. I think it's frustrating, and it's not like this is some theoretical thing either. We've got developers, Bill and Keone, the Tornado Cash as well. There's multiple cases, Bitcoin Fog, Ian Freeman. That's another slightly different case, obviously, but related. They're in prison. They've been taken away from their families. They were pursued and they were prosecuted and persecuted by, in many cases, the Southern District of New York or the Sovereign District of New York. And all of this just seems like this should just be basic common sense, that we want developers to write great open source code here in America, and they should be free to do so. But you feel like you're taking crazy pills a little bit, where it's like, how can you possibly be opposed to this? And it's only in this warped fiat world where there's this completely just inverted sense of what is good for the country and what is not, and what is good for America from a politician sense doesn't always seem to be what's good for the actual citizens of the country. And it's just, I mean, it's got to be even more frustrating for you. You guys are in this. You're in the trenches there in BPI. You're trying to educate people. Are there some folks that are advocating strongly for these protections to be included? Are there some people batting on the right side of this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to report that there are great people who are advocating and fighting for this around Washington. And again, I think most of the trade organizations, pretty much everybody who is, affiliated with the, crypto industry as crypto natives, like we all, for the most part, understand that this is critical, right? I mean, there was a big public letter that went around in the fall that was organized by the DeFi Education Fund that was excellent on this, kind of putting on notice that there were, more than 100 large industry participants who said that developer protections were a red line for them in this market structure legislation. And, I think that that's something that, it already exists, but I think that like reiterating that point to all of the senators and congressmen who are debating this issue right now is incredibly important. And again, if you're like a Bitcoiner listening to this, like you should pick up the phone and call your senator and basically tell them like it is unacceptable for any market structure bill to proceed without strong developer protections. As you said, these are just really core American values that it's unconscionable really to most of us who are standing on the outside looking at this that this would even be up for debate, right? And how is it that we are backsliding so substantially on just core values in our social fabric that we are supposed to enjoy, right? I mean, these developer protections are nothing special, right? Like they're really nothing at all. That it is outside the norm of our current jurisprudence or law frameworks in the rest of our economy. The only thing that makes them unique is that they are in the digital economy, which vanishingly few people in Washington actually understand. Right. And so I would say that, if more than anything, is the main problem that I seem to be, observing in Washington. I mean, I'm a technology guy. I'm an entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. I've been building companies in the technology space for 15 plus years, and it was very surprising to me to sit down in a Senate office. I won't say which one, but I sat down in a Senate office to have a conversation about de minimis exceptions. Right, and we're having a conversation about the current language, which the current language that's being discussed only contemplates the de minimis tax exemption for stablecoins, right? So like USDC, for instance, like a Genius, compliant stable US based stablecoin would USDC is like the only one right now, but the de minimis exception would not apply to Ethereum, for instance, which is kind of weird
Or to
because
Bitcoin?
or to Bitcoin at the moment. But just to finish the point that I'm trying to make
Sure.
here, it's they think that they're helping with this de minimis exception, but in order to utilize USDC, you have to use ETH because that's the underlying chain, right? So like even at the most superficial level of like the language doesn't work technically, they're kind of lost in the woods at some levels, and it's very surprising to me that we're this deep into the game, so to speak, of writing this 100-year law package that is supposed to modernize the entire digital economy for the largest market in the world, and the level of understanding from a technical perspective, from a historical perspective, from a policy perspective, is unfortunately rather superficial.
So I actually was not. You've just taught me something rather disconcerting today. But I thought that the de minimis, at least the current language, did include other crypto assets. Again, I only care about the Bitcoin side of things. I mean, the fact that it applies to stable coins, like who cares? They're supposed to be pegged to the dollar anyway. They're a guaranteed loss coins, not necessarily stable coins, but people need them, right? Dollar's still the prettiest horse at the glue factory, skinniest kid at fat camp, right? But what's even the rationale of applying the de minimis to stable coins, which are presumably almost exactly tracking with some different market aberrations? Like what's the point? That does literally nothing.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like the CEO asks your CTO, what's our AI strategy? Right? And it's just like, oh, well, we get these alerts that happen 10 minutes before our meeting, like it's just, you gotta, when they say jump, you gotta say how high, right? So everything in Washington right now is all about stable coins. So stable coins are where people are paying attention is, I guess, the answer to that question. But yeah, at any rate, I think the broader point that I'm trying to make is, from the outside, you would think that with, the consequences of a multi-trillion-dollar industry that could be the difference between America leading the next century of, kind of economic prosperity on the planet versus not, that we might have some more sophisticated sort of policy analysis going on and, thinking about, how to proceed with structuring these rules in Washington, D.C. And, again, unfortunately, it's kind of, they're trying to, slam a square peg into a round hole with a hammer, right? It's like, oh, well, let's just copy paste everything from the 1913 Securities Act, and we'll just change some of the keyword search, change some of the words, right? I don't think that that's how this process is really going to result in the best outcome for everybody.
Yeah, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, Kyle, but when we come back, I kind of want to dig into some of these other forces at play, because while I don't personally have a huge dog in the fight from the stablecoin side of things, I think they're very actually useful for people all over the world. I occasionally use USDT on Liquid. I don't like using any of the other chains. I'd rather use a Bitcoin side chain. But what I think is really interesting is the posturing and the political maneuvering that's being done between sort of the crypto lobby and the banking lobby, and this sort of legacy versus incumbent versus newcomer dynamic that's playing out, which is quite illuminating, really, for how things really work in Washington. For anyone who wasn't aware, we are going to just take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back here on RoxomTV to dig into this market structure bill just a little bit more. Stay tuned. We will be right back.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. I'm here with Kyle Olney. He's a senior advisor at the Bitcoin Policy Institute and co-founder of SaveOurWallets.org. If you're just joining us now, Kyle and I have been discussing the market structure bill in Washington, D.C. It's got a few different provisions to it. Developer protections for open source devs are one of them. Stable coins are another, and yield on those stable coins. We're going to get back into the dev protections a little bit later, but first I think it's important for us, Kyle, to talk a little bit about the current battle or death match, whatever we'd like to call it, that's taking place between Coinbase, primarily as the head of this sort of stablecoin yield proponents, and Wall Street, the big banks, the incumbents who don't want stablecoin issuers to be able to offer yield on people's stablecoin deposits. And the fact that this might be what ends up killing this bill and thereby stopping developer protections is pretty worrying. But can you set the stage a little bit for kind of how this debate is playing out, or deathmatch, whatever we'd like to call it? It's pretty heated at this point, it seems, correct?
Oh yeah. This is a death match. It's a death match between, again, kind of like the digital native, centralized exchange universe, and kind of the Wall Street, traditional finance universe, right? And the reason it's such a consequential thing for those two players is that this is basically the entire game. Right. As we alluded to earlier, the current, kind of Wall Street, physical brick and mortar banking model is, that you come in, you deposit your money, they pay you very little, and then they go out and they loan that money at, a huge spread. Oftentimes they get paid by the Fed to just park the cash at the Fed, and they collect, 4 points of yield for free, effectively, no risk, while you as a depositor are getting paid, less than 1%, right? Even just peanuts. And that's a, business practice or a policy sort of decision that was made post, the great financial crisis in order to try to plug the balance sheet holes in the broader, banking sector in the United States, because they had suffered catastrophic losses on their home mortgage portfolios and all of these various other things. And, I won't go too deep, but basically you could say that the normal banking industry is not in good health, right? Then you have digitally native players, that are out there who are incredibly lean by comparison, right? I mean, this is, the classic comparison here is Tether is the most valuable banking entity in the entire planet, and probably in human history, by the number of employees that they have to the amount of money and revenue that they're generating, right? And it's because they're digitally native and they're, actually applying kind of modern capabilities to the underlying business. And to a lesser degree, this is true about Coinbase and Kraken and, whoever these other larger entities are that are crypto native. And so from their perspective, the Coinbase, the Kraken, kind of the large centralized, crypto native players, there isn't really any marginal improvement in their product offering compared to, let's say, a JP Morgan Chase, if they can't really lean into, that 24/7, 365 composability of the underlying assets, the ability to actually carry that yield that you can generate and return it to the customers in some valuable way, right? And so for players like Coinbase and others, the ability to pay stable yields is like kind of the fundamental innovation of legalizing stablecoins and merging them into the broader banking system. But for Wall Street and kind of TradFi institutions, this is signing their death warrant. Because what it does is it means that all of their bad practices basically have to evaporate or change overnight, which we know that they won't, and they largely can't. And so what that means is that, if stable yields were able to be paid in the way that Coinbase would like to see them played, Coinbase basically reverse mergers the entire long tail of the, kind of community banking market. Right? They probably can't step on JP Morgan Chase's toes too much, although JP Morgan Chase and other large banks would have to spend some real money getting back into the game and, actually, building their organizations in a sustainable and kind of thoughtful way moving forward. So anyway, this is the large kind of backdrop behind why stable yields are so contentious in this bill. And so this is why you see we're kind of locked in a deadlock right now. I mean, my sources that I've heard from people about this meeting that took place yesterday at the White House between kind of the banking industry and the crypto industry was that the banking industry basically is just digging their heels in, and they're saying like, yeah, well, we'd love to work toward a solution, but we're not just gonna give you the entire industry for free. So, figure out a way to live inside our framework, and, we'll happily invite you in. And then, the crypto native guys on the other side are saying, well, that's insane. That doesn't work. We would destroy all of our credibility with our customers and our entire purpose for being. So at this point, it would seem that this is a rock and a hard place. I don't know how you can see a deal get brokered between those two objectives. They're just fundamentally opposed. And one thing that I might say that's also weird, just as a concluding point, probably doesn't need to be said for this audience, but it is pretty weird to have your competitors sitting at the round table needing to sign off on what the rules of the game are going to be for you to enter the market, isn't it?
Like, I mean, it's just fundamentally absurd. Like all of this, any reasonable person who listens to you right now, I like to think of myself as one of them. I can be unreasonable at times, but that's a different story. But you hear this and you just think, well, this is all just a big racket, right? Quote George Carlin, it's a big club and you ain't in it. Like this, we're talking about one of the most predatory kind of general institutions on earth, which is the banking system. And this isn't a subjective analysis here. This is a very objective one. And institutions that literally, we're talking about some of the same players here that are at the table are the ones that were Jeffrey Epstein's bankers. That's a whole different story, right? But yeah, it's really those open source developers you got to worry about, not the guys in suits on Wall Street who are laundering money for pedophiles. Don't worry about them. Just no one's going to go to jail there. We'll pay a fine. You can see I'm getting unreasonable here. But to get back on track.
Oh, whoa, you're entirely reasonable. You haven't even gotten unreasonable yet.
I know. Well, and here's the thing, Kyle. I look at this and I say they're about to kill this bill, which the main thing that I thought was going to be a positive coming out of it. And I think people getting yield on stable coins, I think that's great. I think you should be able to get, you should be able to benefit from the fact that these banks are basically just vampires sucking off you, and the stablecoins offer a nice credible alternative. We should have competition in that marketplace, but this is big banks explicitly saying we don't want competition, and you realize, well, if the banks can kill this bill, who's really in charge of Washington? If the banks can shut down this market structure bill, who's running this country? How is that possible that the banks can shut down a piece of legislation which citizens want? On the stablecoin yield side, which any reasonable person who loves freedom wants on the developer protection side. How is it that a bunch of stuffy old farts and young farts too on Wall Street can shut this down? I mean, Kyle, to me, this just says, okay, our nation is entirely run by bankers. That's what this says to me. If the bankers can kill this bill, that is confirmation that our nation is completely subservient to the banker class. And frankly, that just pisses me off.
You and me both. And I would say probably 250 to 280 million people in the United States who don't work for the banking sector, right? I mean, it's quite something actually. I was involved in the financial crisis and cleaning it up, 17 years ago, and making sure that the financial markets did not completely fall apart and that the economy didn't evaporate. And if you had told me, 16, 17 years ago that we would be sitting here with an obvious better solution for how to improve the economy and rebuild the entire banking sector to make the United States the most competitive market in the world, and it was going to be, kind of completely hamstrung by the same banks who, brought us to the brink evaporated trillions of dollars in wealth, and all kinds of problems, right? Like the fact that they are even allowed to sit at the table and have opinions about, kind of where future policy needs to go when it's, radically unpopular among the majority of the American voting population. It's kind of shocking, right? Frankly. And yeah, I think that again, it just kind of, I'm not, this isn't unique for me. Like we can read the statistics, but in a post Citizens United world, Washington, D.C. is just an incredibly transactional place. So if you're not writing checks, if you're not, kind of greasing the skids, if you're not moving the money around, it's hard to get airtime. It's hard to get airtime. And the only thing that we have is people power, right? Like we have people power. We can make that people power known. We did in the last election, right? And we, ostensibly put the Congress that was seated in charge in order to implement these things that, the crypto industry and, Bitcoiners are fighting for on the dev protections front. And so to me, I don't know if I'm skating too far away from your point, but, I would say that this is actually, if the White House and, these congressional, representatives who ran on crypto being an important policy priority for them want to, snatch victory from the jaws of defeat here, my advice would be that they should strip out the BRCA, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, as a piece of standalone legislation as it began its life at the beginning of this congressional cycle, and they should just give that a straight up or down vote. Because if you could at least deliver developer protections to the, kind of crypto native voting block, I think that is the difference between absolutely getting stampeded in the next election in, an orange tidal wave, or, being able to fight and, kind of survive another day, right? Like, I don't think that, Bitcoiners, I know for a fact Bitcoiners are not going to take this sitting down, but I don't think that anybody who's under the age of 40 and, kind of is paying attention to where the world is heading is going to take failure as an acceptable outcome for these people in Washington when it comes to crypto policy.
No, I think you're spot on there. And I think that people are just generally sick of this. They're sick of government being ineffective. They're sick of having more and more of their money taken from them through taxes. All of the fraud and waste and abuse that's been uncovered, and there's going to be a heck of a lot more. It's not just Minnesota, right? It is all over the country. Minnesota is just kind of the flashpoint for it, really peeling the veil off. But you realize that you're just, it turns out we're just all paying taxes to a cult of satanic pedophiles who are all compromised by U.S. intelligence agencies and foreign intelligence agencies. And meanwhile, those people cannot even manage to get basic common sense laws passed through. And it starts to seem less of incompetence. It starts to seem more malicious. Again, I digress. I'll save that rant for another day. But what I want to talk to you about as we kind of close out here, we got a few more minutes left, is just to figure out, what do you think are the most likely outcome paths? And then what sort of advice do you have for Bitcoiners who are understandably maybe getting a little bit pissed off at this and who want to try and make their voices heard or somehow contribute to this? How do you see this playing out? And then what, if anything, can we actually do?
Yeah, so those are great questions. And I think, again, kind of the most operative questions, right? Like, we have agency here. We have power here, but only if we aggregate that power and direct the laser toward the target. Right? We can't change everything, but we can change some things. So I guess what I would say here is that at the moment, the default path, actually months ago, back in the fall when we spoke, I think I described this bill to you as the Schrödingerian sort of crypto bill, right? Like Schrodinger's cat. It's both alive and dead, or it was, both something that we needed or something that we needed to oppose. Nothing has really changed here. Like, I would say that, this bill is both alive and dead for the next 30 days until we find out whether or not they can come up with some kind of an agreement that gets something that, Brian Armstrong and, Wall Street are going to agree should be voted on. Color me skeptical, given all of the things that we've just described. Like, I don't really see some grand bargain moving forward here. And frankly, I would say I have a lot of anxiety about any grand bargain that Brian Armstrong would strike with Wall Street in order to get things to move forward, as far as, kind of crypto native or Bitcoin interests are concerned. But what I would say is that there is still a possibility for us to move forward and get what we need in the Bitcoin community, out of this, which is what I just described before, which is the BRCA, right? If we can get a clean up or down vote on a standalone BRCA, I think that is an immense piece of progress and a win that everyone in the Bitcoin community should rally around. And I would argue that it might be the most important and strategic thing that we could accomplish in the remainder of the Trump administration, because we don't know what's coming next, right? As a Bitcoiner, we survived 16 years in the wilderness with no, formal government recognition or regulations or anything. Like, I'm not super concerned that we would be able to continue fighting it out, until, some point in the future where we do get sensible lawmakers to come in and create, guardrails that, most people would think are logical. But it would be much better for us to not exist, as I think you have said many times in prior episodes, in a universe of a hostile, President AOC or a hostile, President Elizabeth Warren, right? I mean, not that
Heaven forbid.
Yeah, I mean, not that either of those are things that I think are particularly likely, but the general construct, right? The Biden administration was incredibly hostile to, Bitcoin interests and crypto interests. So much so that we all kind of basically went underground, right? We kind of had to hide for an entire presidential administration in order to, continue to exist and, interact in a lawful economy. We would prefer that to not happen. And the best way for that to not happen is for us to get developer protections, anchored into law. And so again, to my strategic analysis here, if I were at the White House, if I were in Congress and I didn't want to have, $10 million from Fairshake lined up against me in the next election, or whatever it is, right? And I'm not, to be clear, I have no ability to direct money. That's not a threat on my part or anybody's part that I'm directly associated with. But just as an abstract idea, right? If you don't want to be in the position of having millions of angry cyber hornets swarming around you and your office and everything that you do in as a person in Congress or in government, I would say that getting these developer protections, which should be very down the fairway, not political, really, it's a nonpartisan issue. It's just really trying to uphold things that have already been sort of demonstrated by legal case law and other places. And that most people think is right. These developer protections are just fundamentally American values, right? Like, code is free speech. If you're building something that you don't ever take possession of the underlying asset, and you are not in control of the asset, you should not be prosecuted as though you are an intermediary or somebody who is a nefarious financial actor, right? Like, that's just obvious. So I would say that this is the advice, right? This is the advice to anybody who's listening in Washington. This is the advice to anybody at home who's a Bitcoiner and feels strongly about this. As I said before, pick up the phone, call your senator, tell them that the debt protections are critical and they must be part of any market structure bill. And if they can't get a larger market structure bill done, they should just vote on the BRCA and make sure that these developers can continue, being innovative and keeping the industry in the United States, so that the entire thing doesn't move offshore and we end up, kind of a vassal to, whatever jurisdiction ends up getting it right, like the UAE or Hong Kong or, you name it, right? But it's not going to be in America if you don't have the ability to write code without the threat of going to jail.
It's just crazy, Kyle, that we even have to say these things. And apparently, and I appreciate the work that you guys do at BPI so much. And I've told you and the other BPI folks this, especially after spending a day on the Hill, going around talking to staffers, getting yelled at by my senator, and called a scammer for basically saying exactly what we're talking about here today. And meanwhile, he brought up something about grannies getting scammed at crypto ATMs, and I was like, I don't run the, I don't know why you're like yelling at me about this. This isn't my fault. Like scams happen all the time. I digress. Point being, I'm glad that you guys are there fighting for it, because this stuff, Bitcoin is clearly non-obvious, right? In terms of understanding Bitcoin, in terms of why it matters. If it was obvious, more people would have adopted it already. Everybody would adopt Bitcoin, but it's non-obvious. But apparently, so are the associated things that matter here, like developer protections. But that one should be a little bit more obvious, because that's not just something that's exclusive to Bitcoin, right? You've got open source software developers writing incredible pieces of freedom tech all over the place. And you want that, especially if we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. To me, this just shouldn't be a controversial issue. And I really do hope that the BRCA is packaged externally out of all of this, so that it's not somehow just this little afterthought that's getting thrown in there. Meanwhile, Wall Street and Brian Armstrong are debating, who's gonna give more yield. Like, it's all just kind of absurd that this was even thrown in there. But I get this is how Washington does it, right? It doesn't make much sense, but like apparently that's just how it always gets done. But I appreciate the call to action, Kyle, because I think that people should know that, like, your vote doesn't always matter, but bugging the crap out of your senator in a respectful way, out of your elected official, and telling them this is something that matters to me. I am a voter. I live in your state. This matters to me, and it will impact who I vote for and who I put my increasingly growing economic energy behind in future political races. Because that's the thing. Bitcoin may be kind of taking a dump right now, but Bitcoiners' economic energy is only going to grow stronger and more powerful in the years and decades to come. It would be very foolish of politicians to think that Bitcoiners are not going to start using that economic energy to try and force the sorts of changes that they want to see. I, for one, would just like to see the government be a heck of a lot smaller. But that's a story for another day. But Kyle, we're kind of running up in the end of time here. I guess, as we look at all of this, I mean, what do you put the reasonable odds of this still getting pushed through? And do you think there's a chance that the banks do, I don't know, reach some arrangement with Coinbase? I mean, it's crazy that this shouldn't even involve them, right? This isn't really relevant to them, except that it's hurting their bottom line, which is a big no-no. But is there any chance that this still manages to get through, that this still goes to Trump's desk to sign, the developer protections are still included? I mean, I'm not trying to ask you to make a prediction market here, but where do you put the odds?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, this is a great question. I actually would say that the biggest risk that we run right now as Bitcoiners is the likelihood that they strip out developer protections in order to make this bill less controversial, in order to get some agreement on stablecoin yield that would be, respectable for both, Coinbase, the Coinbases of the world, and Wall Street. So, my guess right now is that this bill is default dead until we have better sort of data to say that it is still alive, or that there is some way for the major impasse on stablecoin yield to be resolved. If we get the news that they've made some, sort of accommodation in order to get past the stablecoin yield issue, I would be very concerned, unless we see strong declarations about developer protections. So, again, I don't know what the odds are in aggregate. I would say that the odds were, pretty long just starting the process this year, that they were going to get this giant omnibus thing done in the first attempt at it. Maybe my guess right now is that there's a 20 to 30% chance that this bill could still continue, given what I'm seeing. And then, as I said, I personally am very concerned about what universe we're in if they're able to move forward, and the compromise is we're going to strip out developer protections. Again, the BRCA was bipartisan when it was a standalone bill. It should be a nonpartisan issue. Again, it's a free speech issue and an innovation and an entrepreneurialism issue, right? Like everybody who wants America to be successful and prosperous and be a big part of the new digital economy should be in favor of this. It's very straightforward. So I would advocate strongly for anybody who's listening, whether you're, again, a policymaker or just a voter, to really, like, this is where we retreat and we hold the line, right? It's on developer protections. Bright red line around that box. and make sure that your senators know that this is critical. Pick up the phone and do your work, right, as a Bitcoiner to make sure that that's the case. And if we see that the developer protections end up getting traded out in order to try to get a larger political deal, moving downstream, I think that as Bitcoiners, we need to get incredibly loud, and do everything that we can to either get those protections reinserted back into the bill or prevent the bill from moving forward without them, because it would be a catastrophe for the United States and for innovation in America, and frankly the world, if those developer protections don't exist and they put some larger set of market structure rules in place that just anchor in a bad regime for large extant players, rather than creating a market where new startups and innovative ideas can actually percolate and change the face of the market.
Yeah, it'd be nice to just see government do their job. That'd be really nice. Cole, I know that's asking for a lot. I'm being a little bit unreasonable here, but a guy can still dream. Kyle, I appreciate you so much taking this hour with us. This has been illuminating, if a little bit enraging and also disappointing, but that's not your fault. You're just the messenger here. Where do you want to send folks just to check out BPI, to check out you? And I highly encourage people to really follow the work that you guys are doing at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, because it is so impactful. It does move the needle. As I've said before, I'd rather have a government full of Cynthia Lummises than Senator Warrens. Unfortunately, Senator Lummis is going to be retiring, which is a bummer, but hopefully we'll get somebody new in her shoes. But where do you want to send folks?
Yeah, so I guess the first place to go and sign up and stay aware of updates that are happening on the bill, saveourwallets.org. As I mentioned, I'm a co-founder there, and we've been trying to fight for advocacy on that front. We'll update the websites when we actually have concrete updates to update and get people news on that front. And then obviously, the Bitcoin Policy Institute exists at btcpolicy.org. That's our core website. You can sign up for newsletters and alerts there, follow everything that's going on. I'm on Twitter at Kyle Olney. The Bitcoin Policy Institute is also on Twitter. You can find them, on Twitter as well. And then, I would just say, continuing to pay attention to people like yourself who are actually covering this issue. Overwhelmingly, Bitcoiners I talk to can't follow what's going on in Washington, D.C. And it's incredibly important that everybody just stay engaged with this process and follow it through to its completion, particularly in this, midterm year where we're going to have a lot of material political decisions to make in the next few months, whether this market structure and debt protections bill moves through Congress or not, right? We can't let the world continue to run past us. We need to be active participants and really fight for the better world that we know we could have if we had just had sensible policy coming out of Washington.
I say amen to that. Great note to finish on. Kyle Olney, Senior Advisor at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, co-founder of SaveOurWallets.org. Go to SaveOurWallets.org. Go to BillAndKeone.org as well. Stay up to date with these things. Keep making noise about them because it does make a difference. We are not totally helpless here yet, and I'm very glad that Bitcoin exists. Now, we'll see if we can get some reasonable legislation around actually keeping our developers free from persecution here in the supposedly free United States of America. But Kyle, thank you for your time so much. Really appreciate it. Great talking to you again. Thanks for all the work you guys do at BPI. We're going to take a quick break, guys, and when we come back, we're going to be right back here on RoxomTV with Frank Corva. We've got a heck of a show still planned for you. Stay tuned. Thanks again, Kyle. But you out there, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the center of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're traveling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. My name is Walker America. I'm here with you every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on RoxomTV, covering Bitcoin and everything else. We're about to bring up Frank Corva to dig into our second hour of the show here. But before we do, just a quick recap of what we had previously discussed here on RoxomTV. We talked a bit about President Trump backing the market structure bill. And we also brought on our guest, Kyle Olney from the Bitcoin Policy Institute. We're going to get Frank's thoughts on this as well. But as we mentioned, President Trump has really voiced his support for the Bitcoin and crypto legislation, saying he hopes the market structure bill is completed so he can sign it into law. The market structure bill is expected to clarify how digital assets are classified, define regulatory oversight, and establish consistent rules for trading, custody, and market infrastructure. But as we heard from Kyle, there are some serious headwinds there. There's a lot of battling going on, a death match, as Kyle described it, between Coinbase and the big Wall Street banks as they fight over the stablecoin yield provisions. Additionally, the developer protections, which are embedded in this bill, they're no longer separate. They're originally part of the BRCA, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. They've been embedded in this bill, and apparently there is talk of throwing them out to make the bill less controversial. I guess basic protections for free and open source software is somehow controversial in this day and age in the United States of America. I do want to bring in Frank to get his take on this a little bit. Frank, how you doing, man? Welcome back to the show. Great to have you here. What's your beat on the whole market structure thing? Not sure how much you caught of the conversation with Kyle. He puts the chances of it actually getting through at around maybe 30%.
Okay.
The biggest concerning thing to me is that there's talk of stripping out these developer protections, which were really the thing I cared about the most in this bill. But what's your take on this? What are you hearing about it through your sources?
Yeah, thank you again for having me on, Walker. Great to be here with you. Was really happy to see you had Kyle on. Kyle's great, really knows the stuff inside and out. He's done a great job with the Save Our Wallets campaign to bring attention to this matter of protecting open source developers. This matter is not only important for all Bitcoiners, it's personal for me. I covered the Tornado Cash trial this summer, and I was at all the hearings for the Samurai devs from the beginning of the pretrial hearings through the sentencing hearings. And we were at a place with market structure, I think, where it was just about to pass a few weeks ago. And I believe it was Coinbase that came in and wanted to have this fight over stablecoin yield provisions. Now, I think a lot of us Bitcoiners who aren't really such big fans of stablecoins, or just sort of that's not our thing, we're like, I know that the Zach Shapiro's of the world from Bitcoin Policy Institute, their head of policy there, great lawyer in the space. I think it was from Coin Center, Peter von Valkenburg also, who said, like, I think this is about as good as it's going to get in terms of protecting developers. And then Brian Armstrong swoops in with like, no, we want to offer yield, so we're going to scrap this whole thing. Really depressing. And if the bill does get passed without protection for developers, we're really lost as far as like, I say this, and not trying to upset people out there, but Bitcoin being the thing that matters, let's just say matters most in this whole world. I don't want to put down people who think stablecoins are important. Personally, not my thing, but it is what it is. But the fact that we're potentially not going to protect developers developing privacy enhancing technology that helps people transact with Bitcoin more in a cash-like fashion that allows people to make sure that they're not giving up their balances of their Bitcoin, or when they're paying for a cup of coffee, or making a bigger payment, in whatever sort of arena they're doing so in. It saddens me that these protections might be lost, because we ideally want these protections so that, one, these developers aren't persecuted and prosecuted, so that we don't see a chilling effect on this sort of technology in the space. And then also so that we're not here begging and signing petitions for the president to pardon the next person that gets put in jail, like we've seen with Keon and William Lonergan Hill, the two Samurai devs. This is not the game any of us want to be playing. This is not where we want to be putting our time and effort into, but we have to, because we deeply believe that people like Keon and Bill shouldn't be in prison. The market structure bill will protect these sorts of developers from their cases even being brought to court. We were right there. We were about to get it across the line. Now Kyle's saying we only have maybe a 30% chance of doing so. Deeply, deeply disturbing, I think, is the word that comes to mind most readily. And it's a shame. Ideally, maybe something happens where that 30% number, becomes a bit higher, and we do see this get across the line. But the bigger thing, and I'm sure Kyle has mentioned this, I've heard him mention it in other arenas, is like, if we don't see these protections in the bill, then we actually do need to work towards killing it, because it's going to do nothing for Bitcoin. I don't personally care all that much about whatever it does for DeFi or any of that kind of stuff, because it's not my thing. Not that that world can do what it wants to do, that's fine, but I'm only going to support the bill if it has provisions that will protect Bitcoin developers. And as of right now, it looks like that's sort of one of the issues that Democrats have with the bill, from what I can tell, from what I'm reading and based on who I've spoken with. So yeah, not the best place to be in, but I'm optimistic that things can still change from here.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit disheartening just to see that the what I view as the most important part of this bill is the one that's basically being treated as just kind of like, it's a throwaway thing. I mean, we're just talking about, the lives of open source developers who are currently, sitting in prison away from their families for the crime of writing code and being persecuted and prosecuted by the Sovereign District of New York. But hey,
that's right.
At least we're going to have some jockeying between the big banks and the stablecoin issuers. I mean, that's the crazy thing to me, Frank, is that, to me, this just seems to really kind of take the mask off and show people who didn't already know that, look, you want to know who's really in charge? Look at who makes the call for whether or not legislation gets killed or passed through. I mean, this is literally just jockeying between the big banks and between primarily Coinbase here.
Yep.
And it just seems kind of insane. It's like, who do you work for? Do you work for the big banks, or do you work for the American people? And I think the answer to that is becoming ever more clear.
Yeah, it's scary. This is not how democracy ideally should work. We all know that corporate interests obviously get an outsized voice in a lot of these discussions, and we're seeing that right now. The Coinbase thing is sort of funny. It's like one day people are cheering for Brian Armstrong when he's sitting talking to like the head of the French central bank in Davos saying that a Bitcoin standard is a thing, you're like, okay, cool. There's like this redemptive quality to him where he does get it at the end of the day. But then there's Coinbase's investments in Circle and stable coins, and they want to be offering the yield, and that detracts from the mission, the Bitcoin mission. And I don't know what to say about other than just sort of it's a factor in the equation. This is there's a lot of money at play here. Obviously, things would change pretty drastically if stablecoins were to offer yield. The banking system would obviously be challenged by that. But I posted something on X about this saying like, I think for most Bitcoiners, this is sort of a non-relevant issue. We've already moved our money, time, energy over, from caring about what banks do into Bitcoin because we don't really believe in banks in the first place. So to watch this argument in particular be the thing that's potentially going to derail this idea of developers being protected is like deeply disheartening.
Yeah, I think that you're hitting the nail right on the head there. It's like for us Bitcoiners, it's like, okay, stable coins, I've got no problem with stable coins, right? It's not that they're used very widely, across the world, right? For people who want the prettiest horse at the glue factory, the skinniest kid at fat camp, the US dollar, right? They are guaranteed loss coins, as I believe Jeff Booth was the one, maybe Jeff Booth or Gladstein was the one to say that, because they are, of course, what are they tied to? Well, they're tied to a depreciating fiat currency. But that aside, okay, fine. But the fact that this is being put as more important than basic, just not even asking for anything out of the ordinary, just asking for the Constitution to be upheld in a reasonable way and to not have just outrageous and egregious over-the-top prosecutions of these open source developers. I mean, Frank, we see time and time again, you've been covering this stuff for years, and thank you for doing that and shedding light on this, but open source developers are made an example of. And it seems specifically in the Bitcoin and larger crypto world, right? Like, I don't care if you're an open source dev for Ethereum, I support your right to do that, right?
Right, exactly.
It's beside the point, but it's like, they're used as an example. They're used as like a, hey, see what happens when you step out of line. See what happens when you mess with the powers that be. Like, we will ruin you. And I think that that's just like, it's very disheartening, and it should be very troubling for anyone out there who cares about the basic freedoms that we're supposed to have as Americans.
Yeah, agreed 100%. But I do think the Overton window is shifting on this matter. I think there are more people, even in the White House. I know this for a fact. They respond to my emails when I email them saying, like, I'm telling you now, like, midterms are coming. There's a non-negligible amount of Bitcoin/crypto proponents out there who are going to vote, who are going to see the likes of the Samurai devs being imprisoned and, Roman Storm from Tornado Cash. He will likely win at the appellate level when it comes to the one charge he was found guilty of. But, ideally, we want to see true peer-to-peer rights exist. Everybody has the freedom to use whatever crypto they want. I think you and I would hope that that's Bitcoin, and I think most people will come around to that being the case. But if they're not there yet, that's fine. No judgment, no shade. That's not the case, and we should all be free to do what we want to do. It's difficult to watch, but I think the hard thing here is just there's much more money and how can I say this? There's much more at stake when it comes to like who gets to give customers yield than there is like when you compare that to like the size of the electorate that understands the importance of privacy and open source technology, preserving that privacy. I was just having this conversation on a podcast right before jumping on with you here. And it's, we've lived in a world where in the analog world, a lot of our transactions were private by default, like a pre-PayPal world, right? Where we're paying one another with cash, maybe here and there doing a digital transaction with our bank or a wire transfer, but not really thinking too much about this. So while you're obviously making this an issue and most Bitcoiners are out there talking about the importance of privacy, it's not something that has sort of shifted radically in the psychology of the general public. And so I think it's something that I think the likes of stakeholders like Coinbase, they don't have to speak to as much, but when they have a stake in USDC and they want that to be the thing that triumphs over banks, again, I think a fair way to put this context, Roy Scheinfeld from Breeze, the founder of Breeze, a company that helps make Lightning payments more readily accessible in all apps. He put it kindly. He said, stablecoins are an evolution. Bitcoin is the revolution. And I think that that's really the big thing, a really good way to put it. Okay, sure. If you're living in Venezuela, Tether looks fantastic. It's great to have access to US dollars. I've lived in Venezuela. I know how people used to go about trying to get dollars to hedge against their currency debasement. And it's great. If it's a lifeline for them in a way, fantastic. That's wonderful. But again, as you mentioned, whether it was Jeff Booth or Alex Gladstein, the concept of even a stable coin, it's not stable. No money. I mean, Bitcoin is stable. There's only 21 million of them. But with stable coins, you're talking about a slow and steady decrease in purchasing power. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's a bit more volatile when you price it in fiat, but you're seeing over time a very, parabolic increase in purchasing power. It's just that most people are not quite there yet. And even when I have conversations with people in the White House, I do have to say they're very willing to listen, and I sincerely appreciate that. But a lot of them will say, like, look, this is very new to us. It was actually one of the reasons you didn't see me in the press room more. They're not, they're a lot of this stuff, they're still, they're more dealing with this idea that all crypto is kind of the same, or, crypto is this broad term that can just be sort of, Bitcoin can be included in stable coins and shit coins and meme coins and everything else. Apologize if we can't use bad language, but
I think it's okay.
Okay. I'll keep it to, yeah. I'll stop from there, but I think the bigger thing here is just a certain level of consciousness, but then also the stakeholders, who's coming to the tables right now, banks and stablecoin issuers. That seems to be where the fight is out, and to a much lesser extent, we have issues with privacy. We know that these things are deeply, deeply, deeply important. It's just when it comes to politics, how important, who are the stakeholders in this? Well, everyday people, the plebs, if you will, the people who want to be able to transact privately. But the plebs aren't necessarily the people in the room as these bills are getting made right now. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of advocates. Even Pierre Richard brought up, I wish we weren't seeing this fight over stablecoin issuers and yield. I wish that the fight when it comes to money that we're transacting with was over the de minimis exemption for Bitcoin, that we were able to transact without having to face a capital gains for spending that Bitcoin. So yeah, I think us Bitcoiners would like to see a lot that's different in this process. Unfortunately, Bitcoiners also don't really love politics. So, in some ways we've sort of taken ourselves out of the room, but shout out to Kyle and the Bitcoin policy team. They have consciously put themselves in the room for the last 3 years. And I wouldn't count out the idea of this bill passing with the language that we want to see in it there, because the likes of Peter von Valkenburg, who is a Bitcoiner at heart, at Coin Center, and Zach Shapiro at Bitcoin Policy Institute, their voices are being heard. And I think that the people in the room sort of doing whatever they're doing with this bill understand that this might not be the biggest issue right now, but that it's an issue that they also shouldn't disregard, and it's something that they're keeping in mind.
Yeah, maybe a note on the de minimis, because Kyle brought up something to me that I was not aware of, which is the current language of that de minimis is actually structured specifically around stable coins, which makes literally zero sense at all.
Yep.
And it's just one of these examples of like, are you kidding? Like, it doesn't matter if there's a de minimis exemption. They're trading at par with the dollar. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing to report there anyway. It's just, Frank, it is just patently kind of absurd. And you feel like, I mean, it's just like it's all some big parody, but it's
Yeah.
not, sadly. It's real life. I wish it was.
It's stakeholders. I have this conversation a lot with Susie Ward, who I'll shout out. She's a Roxom host as well. She dealt with this a lot in the UK, and she was constantly, when doing her advocacy work, you're constantly dealing with, with Bitcoin, there is no centralized authority. There's no Bitcoin group that's funding even policy efforts the same way Solana has a group that's doing it, or the Ethereum Foundation has that. So we're stuck in this position where we have, very luckily, we have the likes of Jack Dorsey, who definitely funds all sorts of levels of things that are helpful to Bitcoin, whether it's circular economies or technology that's being developed. But even one area in which he's, I think, kind of light, or any of the people who sort of back Bitcoin efforts, is policy. And so you're at a place where a lot of these altcoins have these institutes that have they're flush with money, and they can go in there and they know that stable coins running on their rails are one of the big money makers for them. And so they advocate for things like this. I think actually to explain why they want the de minimis exemption for stablecoins is you technically have to pay a network fee, a little bit of Ethereum or a little bit of Solana if you use a stablecoin, or whatever, Tron, whatever you're using. So I think that they're advocating you shouldn't have to report that fee that you have to pay, which is just sort of laughable, because those fees are kind of minimal to begin with, and it's just sort of a very silly scenario. But these are the organizations, they have a ton of money. Bitcoin isn't necessarily in the same place. Luckily, Bitcoin Policy Institute, I think they do see support from Jack Dorsey, from the Bitcoin mining companies that operate in the United States. How much those donations, what they look like compared to some of the donations from some of the altcoin networks, I'm not exactly sure, but I know that there is a competition there, and that on some levels, this is hard, this is really difficult. On some levels, I saw places where it surely wasn't worth picking a fight with the broader crypto lobby. Like, for example, we want to see peer-to-peer rights exist. And in that regard, deep down, I believe you should be able to use whatever you want. But then you get into some of this other stuff where now it's like, okay, well, as a Bitcoiner, I'm making the case that people should be able to use whatever they want. You would ideally, in good faith, you would want people on the crypto side of the spectrum, the broader crypto side of the spectrum, to say, hey, we get that this is important to Bitcoiners and they're aligning with us on certain things. So ideally, we know that de minimis is important to them. You would love to see them say things like this. So we should make sure that the de minimis exemption is there for Bitcoin. Because I think a lot of people in the crypto space, a lot of them I don't think a lot of them even make the argument anymore that ETH is money, or that Solana is money. They would argue that it's something different, right? Like a platform for capital markets or something like that. So you would hope that in good faith, the Solana Institute would also be behind the idea of Bitcoin as money, and therefore there should be a de minimis exemption for it. We're not seeing a lot of that, which is a bit of a bummer. It's not to say that these things couldn't change, but right now that's not the case, and just means that we need whatever advocates we have at the table. Again, the Zach Shapiros, the Kyles, their work is increasingly more important in this day and age, when a lot of other people are at the table, non-Bitcoiners are at the table advocating for what they want.
Well, and I think to take it one step further, it's not even often that it's like they're not advocating for Bitcoin. It's that in the case of things like Ripple, the Ripple Corporation,
oh my Lord,
they've actively funded Bitcoin disinformation campaigns, very publicly so, and it's all very targeted. So not only are these players not advocating for Bitcoin, which if you're really in this, for, let's say, the right reasons and not just to grift and extract value, then you should be for that. Presumably a lot of these, we've seen a lot of these altcoin companies, once they pre-mine their tokens, they sell it and they buy Bitcoin with it, right?
Yep.
They know what Bitcoin is, but at the same time, they can't possibly give Bitcoin a win, because some toxic maxi was mean to them at some point, and they're still kind of hurt about it. But this is the frustrating thing here, is that it's like you're not only fighting the headwinds from the banking industry and just from politicians broadly who do not get Bitcoin, but you're also fighting it from within this crypto ecosystem where they have, you're right that there's less of the talk of, this is why, Solana, Ethereum, whatever is better than Bitcoin. Now they're kind of just like,
yeah,
look, we're a company. We run a big database. We extract a lot of stuff from it. We pre-mined it, but like it's cool because it works pretty fast, and it's still better than the traditional rails. And you're like, well, at least you're being honest about your shit coining. That's the frustrating thing to me, Frank, is that you see they really just like to glom on to Bitcoin when it's convenient and when they can affinity scam on it. But when it comes to actually standing up for Bitcoin developers, they're nowhere to be found. And I think that's the really kind of just, it's disappointing, but it's not surprising, Frank.
Yeah, I would, and I'll give credit to I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong, Toli, the guy who founded Solana. He will very clearly differentiate between Bitcoin and Solana. He'll tell people like, oh, if you're looking to like hedge against currency debasement, go buy Bitcoin. And I respect that. Like, just allow what you do to be something totally different. That's fine. I don't really like what you do either, but that's fine. It is what it is. And people have their right to invest in it or use it or whatever it is. And all that, it's fine. It's just that when it matters, people aren't speaking up, like at moments like this, because at the end of the day, like it's funny whether I'm in the press room at the White House or reporting on something from there, I tend to actually get messages from developers around the world, people who are working on Bitcoin projects around the world who are nervous because the chilling effect is real when the government goes after developers, when the DOJ goes after developers. And so in my mind, there was always this effect of like, we don't just need to get this right in America. I think it's really important that America gets it right, because we're not going to depend on like Russia or China to get this right in a multipolar world. America has to get it right. And I think on some level, because our regulations tend to be copied and pasted globally on some level, or like a lot of countries, people from the rest of the world are looking to the United States to see what happens. we need to make sure that this is a priority. And you would think that this would go through the minds of all developers, whether based in America here, working on Bitcoin, working on an altcoin chain, whatever. And it surprises me that it doesn't. I can't get inside that psychology, and especially amongst the, Anatoly from Solana. He's not as powerful as like Brian from Coinbase, but he has a voice. He could very easily, come around and speak up and say, look, Bitcoin is different from what we do, but it's really important that this is in here. I don't know. And there's many reasons why this might not happen. I don't know. Developers tend to be maybe a little bit more introverted than you or I, who likes being out here, putting our face to these things and talking about this stuff, taking heat for it sometimes as well. So that could be a piece of it. Maybe the people who were advocating, who were trying to defend here, maybe they don't have as much of a disposition where they're out there defending themselves or what they're creating. I don't know what it is, but in moments like this, you'd really love to see people being more vocal about it. Props to you for having this conversation via your platform. Ideally, again, I'm an optimist with all this stuff. I think at the end of the day, we do get it right. But if we don't with market structure and this part gets cut out, I think as Bitcoiners, we need to raise our voices and say, this is going to be an issue. We don't want to see this bill pass without the provisions that we want in it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, there are some bright spots on the horizon as well. You've been reporting on one of them, which is the maybe some favorable news around the New York bit license. I want to get into that with you. Before we do have to cut to a very quick commercial break. And then we will be right back here on RoxomTV. We're going to cover the new New York Attorney General candidate who may be in favor of scrapping the infamous bit license there in New York. So stay tuned. We'll be right back here on RoxomTV with Frank Corva.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right? Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. My name is Walker America. I am here with Frank Corva. We've been discussing the market structure bill. We've been discussing the absurdity of Coinbase and the big banks playing a political football with developer protections within that bill to get what they want as far as stablecoin yields, and generally the just absurdity of DC and how power actually works in this country. But perhaps a piece of good news on the regulatory front. I don't know, Frank, you tell me. But you recently dropped some news regarding the New York Attorney General candidate calling for the scrapping of the bit license. So can you first, we'll get into what the bit license is for those who don't know, but can you first just sort of set the stage for what's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. So just spoke with a gentleman named Khurram Dara. Khurram is running for, right now he's in the race to get the nomination from the Republican Party in New York to run for the New York Attorney General position. This position has been very, very politicized by Letitia James, who has been a huge opponent of the Bitcoin/crypto industry. She's engaged with what we would call lawfare. She has very much broadened the scope of the office, which really should just be prosecuting people doing bad stuff in New York. She has very much made it sort of an enforcement agency of her own, almost like an extension of like a New York SEC or something like that, if you will. It's been really disheartening to watch. Khurram Dara, oddly enough, used to work for Coinbase. He's also done a lot of work in capital markets. I actually just found out we were in grad school together as well at the same time,
Really?
at least different departments. Yeah, when we did, I just interviewed him at PubKey. Shout out to PubKey, New York. And so yeah, he's a Bitcoiner. He's done work in the broader crypto space as well, but a Bitcoiner at heart and wants to see a very, very odious, terrible piece of regulation called the Bit License removed to make it easier for Bitcoin enterprises to do business in New York and to serve New Yorkers.
Okay, so I mean, a piece of good news there, but I think perhaps some folks listening, especially if you're newer to the space or just, you haven't dug into this, they may not be aware of what the bit license is. So can you give us a little bit of the history there? And I mean, odious is maybe too kind of a word to describe
Totally.
it, but can you break down what is the bit license and sort of how did it get to be what it is today? Because it's been around now for quite some time.
Yep, 100%. We're over 10 years. It was the middle of 2015, I think. I'm forgetting his name, but this one of the financial superintendents in New York. I'm totally spacing, but he was like the villain for a very long time back in the day in Bitcoin. He created this. Basically, this wasn't passed through like New York's Congress or anything like that. It was just, hey, there's a new regulation and you need to get this new license if you're going to be a virtual asset business in New York. If you're going, and this isn't like for non-custodial wallets or anything, but if you're going to be an exchange or like, for example, I can't use as a New Yorker, I can't use Swan, I can't use Strike, I can't use River, I can't use Kraken. So like a lot, the first three are just Bitcoin only. Kraken, Jesse's an old school Bitcoiner. Some of the better services in the Bitcoin space I can't use because these companies have never gotten a bit license, it's a redundant license because you also still need to get a money transmission license if you're doing this. So it's like a second license. What it ends up doing is creating a moat for companies that have years to go through a bureaucratic and administrative process. That's what it takes to get one of these bit licenses. I think there's only 32 companies that have them, and I think probably hundreds have applied. Not only years to do it, putting your legal team to work, dealing with the administrative state in New York to get this thing, but millions of dollars. I actually thought it was hundreds of thousands. Khurram Dara actually told me it's closer to millions. So if you're a company if you're a lean startup, let's say River, a great Bitcoin company, a fantastic, absolutely financial Bitcoin and financial services company, Based in New York, Alex, I see Alex in New York all the time. The founder of River is based here. He can't serve New Yorkers, and because he's not going to spend limited resources at River, a Bitcoin startup, on spending, putting his staff to work at getting this license, plus spending these millions of dollars necessary in getting it. So what it's doing is creating a moat for companies that have the money to get this. And this moat can be exploited. And it was funny, the person who created the Bit license, right away, he left working in the government in New York to go and be somebody who could help get you the Bit license. So he created a job for himself. I couldn't make this up in a million years. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, Khurram Dara understands this. And what he wants to see is for the market economy to thrive in New York. He believes that we're seeing an exodus of people from New York, much like California. It's something that deep blue states are suffering from right now. Blue meaning states that sway much more to the left, Democratic, than to the right. And we're seeing it because people on the left, and this isn't a critique broadly of of Democrats, they seem to just think, higher taxes and more bureaucracy and more administrative state is going to solve the issues that are plaguing these states, and they're not going to solve them, because you're a lot of your tax base, we're seeing them leave. We're seeing billionaires in California leave. We're seeing people leave New York. I think, I wrote a piece many years ago called Miami being the new New York. A lot of the financial industry even moving down to Florida because it's just getting so expensive to live here and to do business here, and the administrative hurdles are becoming insurmountable for most, especially startups. So ideally, we're going to get rid of this license, this piece of regulation that is making it very difficult for Bitcoin companies to serve New Yorkers. And I think, Khurram Dara is also, he's just generally speaking, wants to be more friendly to businesses, wants to make it easier, wants to deregulate so that businesses feel more comfortable doing business here in New York. One of the things that the left just doesn't seem to get in New York is you need a tax base, right? You can't just have an administrative state. You need people who are actually producing something, businesses who are producing something to take from, if you will. And Khurram Dara, I think, gets that. I will say this, he's not like a super right-wing maniac or something like that. He's a mild-mannered guy who's just like, look, we want New York to be a business-friendly place. That shouldn't be a ridiculous thing to say in a city that calls itself the financial capital, the financial center of the world, or the center of capitalism, or the market economy. We should be friendly to businesses, not unfriendly to them. And on top of that, it always sort of boils my blood when I hear politicians saying New York is the financial capital of the world. My friends, you cannot be the financial capital of the world if you're not going to embrace money, the future of money, Bitcoin. If you're going to make it harder for New Yorkers to get their hands on Bitcoin, you are not the financial capital of the world. So ideally, we see this potentially change if Dara not only gets the nomination, but then wins in the actual election versus Letitia James, who is the incumbent, who has been making it very, very difficult for Bitcoin companies to operate here in New York.
This is another one of those things where it's just sort of patently absurd. And what you said, the guy's name is escaping me too, but I remember the first time I read that the guy who was in charge of putting the Bit license into effect then left his position, went and started doing consulting for companies who wanted to do it. It's like, I mean, come on.
Yep.
Can you just be a little bit less obvious, at least, with your shameless regulatory grift?
Yeah.
And this is the problem. You had a great note because at frankkorva.substack.com, you did publish this in your newsletter, and you had a great quote, which was, when you attempt to use certain Bitcoin or crypto platforms in New York, you'll sometimes be met with the following message. This platform is restricted in Cuba, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, and New York. And that's just, I mean, it's just insane, Frank. And to your point, this ultimately serves to help the biggest players, right? This is these regulatory moats. It's the same thing we're seeing. Once you get big enough, you can influence politics with your money. We see this right now. We talked about the market structure bill and the big banks. We see this, Coinbase can afford the Bit license, but somebody like River, who, shout out to Alex and the team at River, very happy customer there, not sponsored by River, just love their product.
Yep.
They're not going to, spend that kind of money on it, but it's an undue burden and it serves no real purpose. It's just a regulatory grift. I mean, is there any bright spot in the Bit license, or is it truly just as awful as it, appears on its face?
I'll actually say something interesting. This really blew my mind and it made me think twice. So I covered the Democratic National Convention in 2024, and I went there to speak with whatever Democrat would speak about Bitcoin. And shout out to Ro Khanna. And there was another congressperson, Wiley Nickel, who also, he was genuinely like, he was a Bitcoin proponent. But most other people wouldn't talk about it. But I ended up at this sort of off-site event, like a satellite event, where it was a bunch of hardcore Democrats talking about being Bitcoiners, being into it, also crypto stuff, whatever. But I ended up speaking with Clyde Vanell, who is an assemblyman here in New York, and I just figured him. You could tell he owns some Bitcoin. He speaks about this. I just figured I could go up to him and sort of vent about the bit license, and he'd be like, "I know, I feel your pain. We got to fix that." Blah blah blah. He was proud of it. He was just like, "We protected you from FTX. We protected you from BlockFi." And I was like, "Okay, I'll allow that argument to exist. Fine. If that's the way you think about it, that's fine. But are you protecting me from using the highest quality services out there, like River, like Strike, like other places like that?" There genuinely is, with this sort of like nanny state mentality. There's this thing of like, no, 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 we're the good guy. Like us making it harder. He's like, the issue isn't the bit license. It's just that we're not processing the applications quickly enough. It's like, my friend, I'm sorry. Like I don't know what to do with that mentality. I remember having that. I haven't thought about that conversation in probably a year or so, but it blew my mind because I really just thought I'd be like talking to someone who works in government who also sort of feels the pain of it. And he was like, no, 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 no. We're doing God's work out here by preventing these companies from hurting customers and blah, blah, blah. So that's literally the mentality that we're up against on some levels here in New York. There are people who think that there's nothing, not only is the bit license not unjust, but that it's actually something that like sets New York apart in terms of how good it's doing at regulation. Stunning, absolutely stunning.
I mean, I can see, okay, playing devil's advocate on their behalf, I can see the argument there. Sure, you're, I guess, protecting New Yorkers from some of these scams, but I mean, have there been no companies that ultimately went under and lost user funds that had a bit license? Like, do they have a perfect record? I don't know if you know this, but
it's a great, that's a really, really good question. I mean, Gemini has a bit license, and they had the whole thing that happened 2 or 3 years ago where they had like their lending product, and it was Genesis, the what's it called, the market making firm that was helping with their, like, so you could lend your Bitcoin through Gemini, and you were getting a slight yield on it. Wasn't anything nuts. It was comparable to like what Ledin gives, a highly reputable company like Ledin, another company I can't use as a New Yorker, and the bit license didn't stop that happening with Gemini. People didn't have access to their Bitcoin for whatever it was, like over a year because of that thing. So I would say Gemini's record, they did a great job in making sure all of that Bitcoin ended up getting recovered and everything, but it's not flawless. Has that happened with other companies? It may have. But with the Gemini thing, that's the first thing that comes to mind. No, it doesn't. It didn't stop. It doesn't stop everything. The other side to things like FTX is, or even BlockFi, is that we know that there's a risk to leaving your coins on any exchange. So if you were using FTX, you weren't hurt if you were using it correctly and buying Bitcoin and then taking your Bitcoin off and moving it to a a hardware wallet or a non-custodial wallet. With BlockFi, there's risk in lending to anybody. So sure, like it blew up, and I'm not here to comment on that, but as Bitcoiners, the Andreas Antonopoulos is warned against this kind of stuff early on. And it's not to say there are companies out there that have a flawless record like Ledin. I love what Mauricio and the team there is doing. But at the same time, like, these exchanges really should only serve as, okay, this is where I buy my Bitcoin and then I move that Bitcoin into my own custody. That's how Bitcoin works. That's what actual Bitcoin is when you actually have the keys to it. So it's like, okay, I get on some level the argument about FTX, but honestly, with that to me isn't so much a Bitcoin argument as it is more of like a crypto speculation argument. Like, most people who are using FTX were just using it for their derivatives and for speculating on altcoins and stuff like that. So it's like, it's hard for me to really think too much about that argument as a Bitcoiner, because most Bitcoiners I know weren't using FTX as their primary way to obtain Bitcoin. And yeah, so it's, and also you have to think about this in 2015 when the bit license came into existence, altcoins weren't really a thing. So this was very much created to make it harder for Bitcoin companies to operate in the state. While that might be different now, the original intention primarily had an effect on Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies. So, from a historical perspective, this was to make it harder for New Yorkers to get their hands on Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, it's again one of those things where it's perhaps the intentions were good. Let's be charitable. I don't think they were. Clearly not, because the person who was directly responsible for putting it into law was then profiting off it immediately after. So
Yep.
those don't seem like very good intentions. But ultimately, I mean, this is a great thing if this does get peeled back. And if we start, I mean, you need less regulation if you want business to flourish, right? This is not
Yes.
rocket science. This is just apparently really hard for some people to understand. But I think that in some of these kind of, let's say elite regulatory circles, if I can say that,
Yep.
it's like that. They're not trying to make business flourish. They're not trying to protect citizens. They're not trying to do anything. They're trying to basically continue towing the line that they've been towing, to find ways to profit off of these things on the side, and ultimately just to make it very difficult for young, upstarts, for non-incumbents to be able to ever get a foothold and
Yep.
in a large market of potential customers, which is just ultimately a shame. But I mean, are you pretty confident, just based on your conversation with him, that if he ends up getting in there, I mean, obviously he has to win as well, but that this is going to be one of his top priorities to kind of get this thing out of here?
Oh, without a doubt. I think so. The only thing to keep in mind, though, is that he will have to convince whoever. This will be something that has to happen via the governor. The governor is going to have to get on board with this as well. So it's not magic. I think the bigger thing, though, is that the office, the scope of the AG's office has become so large under Letitia James. It's so much bigger than the initial reason for the office, that just having somebody in who talks about this thing being an issue, whether the governor is Democrat or Republican, whatever it is, that's at least a starting point for New York. It's just having like a pro Bitcoin AG who's not trying to have the scope of the office grow too large. Who does want to see Bitcoin businesses in general flourish in New York. I think that alone will end up having some effect. And I think generally speaking, I think what even Democrats, I think what they learned from 2024 was that there's no good reason to be anti-Bitcoin. Maybe if you're in the deepest of deep blue states like Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren gets away with it. But also, his name just came to mind. Ben Losky is the person who created the bit license. Yeah. But I think that we're seeing, I think it was the new governor of Virginia, who's a Democrat, who is pro Bitcoin, wants to see, that was a good development that happened. Ideally, I think all of us want to see this become nonpartisan. And given right now how large the role of the New York Attorney General is, and I know that Kurumdara wants to scale that role back, that person does get listened to. They're on TV talking about this. They have the governor's attention. So the way I look at this is it would be a win just to have somebody speaking rationally, not only about doing away with the bit license, but saying things like, which he said. We did an interview at PubKey. Shout out to PubKey and Thomas. We did a podcast with Kurumdara before the live event we did with him, where he's saying things like, I also don't think we should be criminalizing privacy. The Samurai developers should not be in jail. This was also, I think, the biggest thing. Neither Thomas nor I were expecting this, but the Bank Secrecy Act is unconstitutional. These are things I want to hear from a major attorney general, the New York State Attorney General. Not that he has any influence over what happens, with the Southern District of New York, which is a federal agency. That's the court district in which the Samurai developers and the Tornado Cash developer was tried. But again, we know that even local politicians, if they're in a big enough role, can have some effect on the psychology of federal policy. And so having somebody in this role in New York talking about, privacy being important, the Bank Secrecy Act being unconstitutional, man, I will take it. It is a breath of fresh air compared to what we've been dealing with when it comes to Letitia James for the last, I forget how long she's been in office, but feels like an eternity.
Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to this thing that I'd rather have a government and, regulatory system full of folks like Senator Lummis than Senator Warren, right? Like, I don't want the government's hands in these things regardless, but, until we shrink the state massively, which, holding out, it's all I want for Christmas. But until then, we're unfortunately going to have to deal with this. But the best thing that we can have is people who are friendly and who actually have freedom as their guiding principle for making things more free, for protecting the freedoms that we have. Because as you and I both know, Frank, the government does not give you rights, but they sure as hell find a lot of ways to take them away.
Yes.
And this is what you want to see. And especially, I think there's I would hope a new generation kind of coming up that's maybe not so entrenched with the existing power structures. That may be a little naive of me because these power structures they run long and they run deep. But this, at least, I mean, hearing this from you, and I got to check out the full interview that you did at PubKey with Thomas as well. But this is great news, right? This is something that if it goes through, if he wins and if he's able to get this through, that'd be a huge win for the people of New York. Especially as the folks in New York City are dealing with a recently elected communist. But that's a different story. I want to go ahead. Yeah.
On a quick note, I think part of the reason I highlighted this story because people tend to everybody's on X a bit hyperbolic, and it's like I highlighted this particular story because it's not the end. Like there's going to be a counter to Mamdani. There's always a reaction to it, and I think on a certain level, Karamdar, like I said, very mild mannered. He's not out here trying to start beef with people. But I asked him. I said, "What is your relationship with Mamdani end up being?" And on some level, he gets to bring some of this other rhetoric to Mamdani. And I think the one thing I try to look for, Mamdani actually did a video talking about how it's too hard to open a bodega in New York because of all the red tape. I could get behind that. I don't have to agree with your other politics, but I can get behind you making it easier, especially for a small business to do business in New York. I mean, that's the lifeblood of New York. And so if Mamdani and Karamdara end up seeing eye to eye on cutting red tape, amen. Then we've made a situation with Mamdani which feels very dire, especially to people looking in. I mean, New York is still just kind of New York. I've been here forever, and it's like, it doesn't feel too much different under him. Not that I'm a fan, but ideally, it's like let's look for places where we can be symbiotic, where we can work together. And I think having Karamdara there, it will be a nice. I don't even want to say counter because that feels too antagonistic, but it'd be a nice balance to what Mamdani is. I think it would be nice to see somebody. I wouldn't even say he's fully on this uber right wing side of the spectrum, but someone to balance out what Mamdani at least talks about.
Yeah, something a little bit less hammer and sickly.
Yes.
But
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, if Mamdani ends up cutting red tape, that is fantastic. He would be the first socialist or communist in history to actually decrease regulation. I would give him credit where credit is due there, right? That'd be fantastic. If we can somehow get him psyoped into not behaving like a commie, that would be wonderful.
Amen.
For New York. You still got just a couple minutes left, Frank?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. I think you had one more thing you wanted to go to. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay. And I'm glad you kind of brought that home there because I think that is really important. What I wanted to ask is just let's zoom way out right now. Vibes are weird, Frank. Gold and silver were running hard. I mean, they're still running pretty hot. Gold sitting just under 5,000 an ounce, silver at 84 an ounce, something like that, after both of them running up massively in these past couple of weeks and basically this whole year. Meanwhile, Bitcoin is languishing, and I think a lot of people are just kind of thinking what the heck is going on here? So how are you looking at this right now? You've been in the space for a while. You've been tuned into the political side as well and just the monetary and economic side. What are you looking at right now? How are the vibes for you? Are you, shifting your coverage away from Bitcoin and towards gold these days, or are you still on the orange train?
Nah, yeah, keep it. Bitcoin to me, it's the best form of money we've ever seen. I believe it will bring about an age of enlightenment, across the planet. So yeah, I don't think gold will do that. I think what's happening with gold and silver is far different than what's happening with Bitcoin. I think what you're seeing with gold and silver is the paper ledgers that the markets have, whether it's Wall Street or the CME, having to reconcile with physical demand for these metals, and the base layer of the world no longer being U.S. Treasuries, moving out of an age where U.S. Treasuries are sort of the base layer money for the world. Shout out to Nick Bhatia. He's done great work on this in his book, Layered Money. I think we're moving towards more of a hard metal standard. I hesitate to say hard money standard because I don't think gold is good money. And I think a lot of times when it gets referred to as money, it's sort of a base layer, but we've always built credit systems on top of it, whereas Bitcoin is fundamentally different than that. In and of itself, it's money and also this base layer. But the big thing, Jack Mahler just did a great riff on this on his recent sort of one-man show podcast. He talked about it. He's just like, look, most of the world doesn't fully understand what Bitcoin is yet. Very little has exposure to it. A lot of it still kind of trades. Bitcoin still kind of trades in markets like a tech stock. But also, I would say there's something else that he noted that I don't think is, I think it's important to acknowledge. Bitcoin does tend to be the canary in the coal mine as far when you look at it through a market lens. I personally think we might see a pretty severe downturn across markets this year. And that's maybe a whole different episode, but I think what you're seeing with Bitcoin, it still gets viewed, it shouldn't be, but it still gets viewed as more of a risk-on asset versus a flight to safety asset. So gold, I think, gets that the markets treat it more like a flight to safety, whereas Bitcoin should be that. It's a better version of that. But right now the markets look at it as a bit more risk on. The other thing about Bitcoin is that it's a 24/7 very liquid market. So right now, if you're hurting on some level of liquidity is drying up, the easiest thing you can sell is a little bit of Bitcoin to go and pay your mortgage this month or something like that. Ideally, we get to a world where we don't have to go sell it, where the person who we pay our mortgage to just accepts Bitcoin, but we're far from that world. We're in a very fiat denominated world where most look at Bitcoin as a speculative asset. I just want to say to the newbies out there, I know this hurts. I remember what it was like to get into Bitcoin and to watch the price go down in fiat terms. And I think as Bitcoiners, it would do us well to be a bit more empathic. A lot of us tend to sort of look at the world through maybe a Bitcoin standard lens, one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. But to a person that's coming to this from the fiat world is all they know. A friend told them that Bitcoin is going up forever, and it is on a broader time frame. That's what I believe, at least. I think you believe the same. There's going to be these funky periods where we see massive drawdowns, and we have seen this in the past. I mean, back in the day, 90% drawdowns, we're lucky now those drawdowns tend to, in the last cycle, it was 60, 70%. We could see that again very easily in this cycle. Something I try to do through my newsletter, one of the reasons I still write it, actually, the part of me always wants to just move on, but I know a lot of like friends of mine who aren't paying attention to Bitcoin day in, day out, read it. And I think psychologically it helps them to just not give up on it, because otherwise they're like, well, this speculative bet that I made on this thing going up, it didn't play out. So let me panic sell at the bottom. And I think that's the biggest thing that we all need to try to do as Bitcoiners. It's like we don't need to encourage everybody to go all in right away. But the data shows that a lot of people tend to get motivated to go in when they have FOMO. They see the price going up, they buy it. And then if you look at like Checkmatey, James, Check on Chain, the data ends up showing that people panic sell most of their stack at the bottom. I think all we really want to do is keep people from panic selling their stack. So if you're new to Bitcoin, Walker's been through this, I've been through this, we've been here for a while dealing with this kind of stuff. Don't overexpose yourself to it. Look at whatever you've invested as a down payment on your education on Bitcoin. Listen to Walker daily on this podcast, listen to his podcast, listen to other people who are writing about this, but who are providing signal, who are explaining what Bitcoin is on a deeper level, why it's necessary, why eventually it will go up again when priced in fiat terms. So look at it, I say it's like your first Bitcoin purchases when you first get into it. You're usually buying high and watching it go lower. It's just the way FOMO works. It's sad, even seeing like Google Analytics, like Bitcoin podcasts get less views in the bear market. That would be the best time for people to be listening, to be slowly accumulating when the price is down. Just not the way things work, though. So stick with it. Stick with us. Stick with people who are trying to sort of like share what we know, our experience. We know that it hurts, but this is also sort of how you get forged in the fires of being like a true Bitcoiner. Think about it this way: you're doing the hard work in the winter, you're in the gym, so that you have the summer body. That's what this work is right now. You're doing the hard work right now in what looks like it's going to be a bear market, or we're in a bear market, so that when the bull market comes around, you could sort of flex and show off the work that you've done.
Everyone can finally get girlfriends.
That's right. That's right.
Man. Well, right. That's couldn't agree more with you. And yeah, these times are painful, but in my somewhat limited time in Bitcoin, but getting longer now, there's one thing I've realized: it's right when you start feeling the most pain, right when you start to maybe have a little inkling of doubt, something like that. That's usually the time where everyone's sentiment is bottoming out, and it's usually the best time to buy. So if you still got a kidney left, you can always
let's go.
Get rid of one of those. I might have to get rid of this chair here pretty soon. I've got too many microphones in this room. But do what you can to create value for the world. Stack hard and be patient, because this isn't a get rich quick thing. It's a save wealth slowly thing, and don't be debased into oblivion. And it helps to have absolutely unconfiscatable, uncensorable money. Like that's a great, as a medium of exchange, it's also fantastic. Let's not forget that, But Frank, I appreciate your time here. Where do you want to send folks? Where can they get more of your work and kind of follow along with everything?
Yeah, always a pleasure being on with you, Walker. Thank you so much for having me back on. You can follow me on X, just at Frank Corva. Please go over to Nostr. If you're not familiar with what Nostr is, maybe download Primal app or Damus. And you can find me there. LinkedIn is good too. And then if you do I try to have a bit of a coaching vibe with my Substack. I cover things like, New York Attorney General who is pro Bitcoin, wants to do away with the bit license. But I always do a market section where I don't do like a deep macro breakdown. It's more of a like, look, this is where we're at. I know this is hard. I've been here before, giving a little bit of my experience as, what it was like to be new to the space. So I constantly try to focus my efforts on the newbies out there. So if you feel like you need a little bit of that, like a little oomph at the end of every week, I usually publish on Sundays or Mondays, just to sort of not give up on this stuff. That's what I'm trying to do, especially in the bear market. So feel free to subscribe over there, frankcorva.substack.com. And again, thanks for having me on. Sincerely appreciated.
Always great to have you on, Frank. Appreciate it very much and appreciate the work that you do to keep people informed on all of this. And crossing our fingers that you folks in New York can finally have some reasonable regulation that allows you to use the other applications we are all privileged enough to use in our slightly less autocratic states. I say slightly there because they're all a little bit. But thanks very much, guys. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. Then we'll be right back here on RoxomTV. Follow Frank Corva. Do check out the work that he is doing. He does a fantastic job breaking things down and keeping you up to date on everything Bitcoin and the world of politics. Thank you guys again. We'll go to a quick break. Then we'll be right back here on RoxomTV with more coverage. Stay tuned.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin. No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right? Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you, don't go!
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. My name is Walker America. I am here with you every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on RoxomTV. We just heard from Kyle Olney, a senior advisor at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and Frank Corva, an independent journalist. We heard about a lot of things related to the Bitcoin and crypto market structure bill, the developer protections that may or may not actually make it through there, some of the jockeying around stablecoin yield, as well as the overall kind of absurdity around all of this related to the fact that big bankers can apparently influence what actually gets passed into law. Shocker, I know. We got a few more stories here to cover in this last hour of the day, and some recently just breaking news here on RoxomTV. The U.S. House just passed the bill to end the partial government shutdown. So this just came in moments ago. The U.S. House has passed its funding package and ended a partial government shutdown. It now heads to President Donald Trump's desk for his signature. The measure funds most of the federal government through September and provides the Department of Homeland Security with short-term funding for only 2 weeks. The plan is to have lawmakers return for another vote in these 2 weeks. Now, Democrats want new limits on what they call Trump's aggressive immigration tactics, especially after 2 U.S. citizens were killed by federal agents in Minneapolis last month. Meanwhile, Republicans want stricter voter ID and citizenship requirements. The political tension has been sharpened by a parallel legal battle over one of those Minneapolis shootings. A federal judge has dissolved an emergency order blocking the Department of Homeland Security from destroying evidence in the fatal shooting of ICU nurse Alex Preddy, saying investigators are unlikely to tamper with records. Even so, the judge criticized administration officials for rushing to defend the agents and label Preddy as a, quote, terrorist before investigations were complete. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has now pledged to deploy body cameras for all DHS officers starting in Minneapolis. Now, it's going to be very interesting to see that I've found that a lot of body camera laws end up backfiring on the people who are calling for them in the first place, but let's see what happens there. But zooming out on this a little bit, guys, I wish that the government could just stay shut down for a little bit longer. I know, all of our, you noticed that the government was shut down, right? It must have been very painfully obvious that there weren't people breathing down your neck trying to increase the regulatory pressure on you and siphon off more of your money from tax dollars. But we all know the IRS never shuts down, even if the rest of the government does. But this is just classic political jockeying, right? They're using these things as partisan footballs, back and forth, over and over again. As you saw, the Department of Homeland Security is only funded for another 2 weeks. This will be back again for another vote, which will be more jockeying back and forth. The circus always has performers ready to perform. So let's see what happens here. One of the things that I do want to point out is that now on the topic of Democrats wanting to have new limits on Trump's, quote, aggressive immigration tactics, especially after these killings, what I find very interesting in all of this is the fact that we see such an outcry about all of the ICE operations that are happening right now, all of the deportations that are happening. I just wish we would have seen this same sort of outcry, or it would have been at least consistent to see the same sort of outcry under prior administrations. I believe to this day so far, this may change, but President Biden deported more people than Trump. President Obama, more still. George W. Bush, a heck of a lot more, I think. And Bill Clinton, I think he may have been the winner in that in terms of most deportations. So I think it's important for us to pay attention to what is getting the most coverage right now. Now, this is not to say anything about the legality or justification around these killings. I think the loss of life in any context here is very, very tragic, right? Nobody wants to see that. But it speaks to the larger point that when you see a very activated political base around certain particular events under certain administrations, usually when they are on the outs politically and the other colored team is on the ins, it makes you wonder what the real motivations are. Why not all of these protests during the Biden or Obama administrations? We had the whole Trump is putting kids in cages thing, that whole story for a while, and then it was found out that those kids in cages policies were started by President Obama. So why not the outcry then? And if you're watching here on RoxomTV, we try to cover things in an unbiased way, but us as commentators can't help but put our own particular flair on things. And I would just encourage you to try and be consistent with how you're viewing the coverage on these different topics and also your response to them. At the same time, we've had amidst all these protests, amid all these other things, we had the news come out. Well, not really news to anybody at this point, but rather confirmation that in fact we have a group of elite pedophiles that seem to be operating within and around our country. That Jeffrey Epstein was in fact tied to multiple intelligence agencies, foreign and domestic, and that some of the most rich and powerful people in the world are implemented in this. And update to that story here, we've recently received word that the Clintons have agreed to testify in the Epstein probe, and the UK scandal also is deepening around Mandelson. So former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton have agreed to testify before Congress in a sweeping investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. The decision comes after a Republican-led House panel accused the couple of refusing to cooperate with its inquiry into Epstein's ties to political and business elites. Their aides say that the Clintons will now appear in person after previously arguing the probe was partisan and politically motivated. The House Oversight Committee has recommended holding both Clintons in contempt for declining to testify about their relationship with Epstein. Bill Clinton has acknowledged flying on Epstein's plane several times in the early 2000s, but says he knew nothing about his criminal activity and regrets the association. Wink. Across the Atlantic, the recent batch of Epstein files released has plunged British politics into turmoil as well. Former Labour power broker and ex-U.S. ambassador Peter Mandelson is under investigation after the files suggested he leaked confidential government briefings on economic policy to Epstein and received tens of thousands of dollars in donations from him. Mandelson has quit the Labour Party, denies wrongdoing, and says he does not recall receiving payments. How convenient. But police are now reviewing whether his conduct could amount to misconduct in public office. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called for Mandelson to be removed from the House of Lords and ordered a review of his contacts with Epstein, while opposition figures are demanding a full inquiry. The files show Mandelson forwarded a memo discussing asset sales and debt reductions to Epstein, prompting questions about whether sensitive information was improperly shared. And, of course, this is all still just alleged for now, but it seems very clear that it was. I think if there's one thing that's coming out of all of these Epstein disclosures, and I'm sure we have not seen the last, and remember, so much of this is still heavily redacted. I'm not sure to protect who, the people that Epstein was communicating with in many cases, as you see the name and emails blurred out and redacted from many of these documents with Epstein's correspondences. But it really just sort of makes you wonder, how many people, how many of the decisions that are made by those in public office or those that are sort of, in the, let's say, business elite were being heavily influenced by Epstein and by the intelligence agencies that he was, allegedly, wink, working for at that time. I think that we're going to see these things continue to spiral. What I hope is that we actually see genuine accountability. Because at this point, I think the American, not just the American people, but people around the world, this is embroiled politicians the world over, have really come to a point where it is hard to have any faith whatsoever in the institutions that are supposedly elected democratically and elected to serve the people. It seems that in many cases, the people at the top of these institutions were actually serving themselves or trying to avoid being blackmailed into oblivion due to the compromise that was captured on them at Epstein Island or one of his other various parties that he had. I think that we see more and more of these disclosures happening. I hope that we see more unredacted disclosures. And boy, wouldn't it be amazing if some bright young person at the Department of Justice just happened to accidentally leak things out, WikiLeaks style. I think that we need to see more information on this. It is horrific to see it. The things that you read about in these disclosures, in these documents, in these emails are absolutely horrific and disgusting. And I think that people have just simply had enough. Institutional trust has never been lower the world over. And you start to see why. It was already low and getting lower before any of these latest releases. But I don't know if this is the final nail in the coffin for these institutions or for the elites that are in charge. I mean, we'll see. Does just being present on Epstein's plane mean that you are, guilty of pedophilia? I'm not alleging that. I would hate to be sued by the Clintons, right? So I'm just asking the question. Does that mean? I don't know. But the point is that we now have confirmation of what we already knew, that our political and, in many cases, economic elites are completely compromised, that they're often depraved and disgusting, and that they have been covering up for each other for many, many years. This is one of the reasons why, Bitcoin doesn't fix their depravity or fix the heinous acts that they perpetrated onto innocent young children. But what Bitcoin does do is defund their economic machine. This is ultimately, all of these people were playing the ultimate fiat games, right? Proximity to the money printer. As you heard in the case with Mandelson, this was a case of Epstein receiving the most material, non-public insider information that you could possibly get, which is what central banks are going to be doing with their balance sheet, with their monetary policy. So all of this is tied so closely with the fiat system itself, with the perverse incentives that system creates. And again, Bitcoin doesn't fix that. Nothing is going to fix that. This system is irreparably broken. There is no way to get around it. There is no way to fix it, certainly not from the inside. But what we can do is begin to opt out, to move our economic, our monetary energy, move the value of our work, move it to another parallel system. And that's why, again, Bitcoin doesn't fix this, but at least does give us a way to opt out and stop funding and feeding this beast that has caused so much harm and destruction. And ultimately, we'll see what happens with these. I think there's going to be more, as I said, more and more disclosures coming out. I hope more of it is unredacted. Let's see. A lot of it is very, very hard to read because you realize just how depraved these people are. But at least, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think we need a heck of a lot of disinfectant because, frankly, these people are horrific. So let's see what happens. We'll be following it closely here on RoxomTV. We're going to switch gears a little bit here to Spain, where they've just instituted a ban for social media for under 16s. Basically, Spain is preparing to block children under 16 from accessing social media. The plan would force platforms to introduce strict age verification systems and bar minors from signing up. This is part of a broader campaign from supporters of the ban who say this is needed to combat hate speech, pornography, and disinformation. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says children are being left to navigate a, quote, digital Wild West. Here's more on what Mr. Sanchez had to say. Let's go ahead and roll this video.
That if we do not like social media platforms, we can simply leave them. That no one is forced to use X or TikTok. And they're right. For many of us, this is still an option. But we know that our children and many citizens do not have that choice. Social media has become an integral part of their lives, of their reality. So if we want to protect them, there's only one thing we can do: take back control. Spain will ban access to social media for minors under the age of 16. Platforms will be required to implement effective age verification systems, not just checkboxes, but real barriers that work. Today, our children are exposed to a space they were never meant to navigate alone. A space of addiction, abuse, pornography, manipulation, violence. We will no longer accept that. We will protect them from the digital Wild West.
Sanchez is calling on other European countries to follow Spain's lead, arguing that online safety is a cross-border problem that no single government can solve. I'll agree with him there that government is not the solution here. The Spanish government plans to introduce a bill holding platform leaders personally accountable for illegal and hateful content, criminalizing algorithmic manipulation, and requiring systems to track and limit the spread of harmful material. Sanchez stressed that age checks must be meaningful, not, quote, box-ticking exercises. Spanish officials say the legislation could begin moving through Parliament as early as next week. Spain's move follows Australia, which became the first country to impose a similar ban in December, and comes as Britain and France consider similar restrictions. Critics warn it could be difficult to enforce and may drive young users to unregulated platforms or VPNs. And this is something we've covered here extensively on Roxom. Again, whether it be the Australia ban or France or the UK's move to institute similar bans. And one of the things that I think is really important to pay attention here to is that Sanchez is stressing that these checks must be meaningful, right? Not box-ticking exercises, as he said. Well, what does that mean? Well, that obviously means actually verifying what your age is. How does one do that? Well, you obviously do it through uploading your ID, through taking a selfie. We've all done some of those facial recognition and paired with your driver's license or passport, whatever it may be. Those systems exist all over the place. I'm sure all of those companies are champing at the bit to get a piece of that government contract, as they have in Australia. But really, what does this do, right? And whose ultimate responsibility is it to protect the children? A lot of government overreach is often packaged in one of two ways. It's the old meme. How would you like this wrapped? Would you like protect the children or counter terrorism? These are the typical ways that governments basically fearmonger people into getting them to agree to whatever sort of pseudo-totalitarian overreach happens to be the flavor of the day. And in this case, it may sound good on the surface, right? I mean, after all, who doesn't want to protect children? You would have to, be Jeffrey Epstein to be against that, right? But of course, that's not what this is really about. What this is really about is making sure that everyone online, everyone who's using social media, that their identity is ultimately tied to their real world identity, that their digital identity is tied with their physical identity, that they can be tracked, that they can be surveilled, and that they can be followed and made sure that they're, followed up on if they start saying things that step out of line. You've seen historic arrests in the United Kingdom by the thousands for, stepping out of line and saying hateful things on social media. This is the ultimate game plan here, because of course, the folks that under 16s who try to get on these platforms, they won't be able to if this law goes through, right? Because they won't have an ID that shows that they are over 16. But everyone else, to prove that they're not under 16, will have to provide their ID. We'll have to put it into a big old centralized honeypot and run it through all those checks. And of course, they'll tell you, well, don't worry. We abide by GDPR here in Europe. Your data will be deleted. It won't, it'll all be handled in the most professional European Union compliant way. But the reality is that this is the nefarious part of this. It's not about protecting the children, right? Protecting your children starts at home. It starts with parents setting boundaries and limits on what your children are allowed to do, whether they're allowed to use social media, whether you even give them a phone. Your kids really don't need a smartphone when they're too young, right? We all somehow got along without it. And obviously, social media addiction is a very real thing. It is also obviously very harmful to the psyches of young people. We've seen this. There's all sorts of research on it. So again, this is not to say that we shouldn't, quote, protect the children, but that protecting the children starts at home. The moment we start abdicating the responsibility for protecting our children, abdicating it from ourselves as parents and giving it to the government, we're on a very slippery slope. And this is what you see, again, the world over, that the government should need to step in and provide these checks and balances to make sure that the kids are kept safe. But if the government was that good at keeping kids safe, you'd think they would have busted this child sex trafficking ring of Jeffrey Epstein a lot sooner, right? But that's just the reality of it, that the government doesn't actually care about your children. The government doesn't care about anything. The government can't care. It's an entity made up of people who have their own motivations. Now, they are just people. That doesn't make them, just because you're in government, doesn't mean you're a bad person. There are lots of noble-minded and moral people in government. Far too few, unfortunately, because government tends to attract the 1% of the general population that are clinical psychopaths. But that's a different story. The larger point here is that you should follow these sorts of legislations very, very closely, because they are going to continue to creep. It will always be under the guise of protecting children. But the ultimate goal of it is ultimately to tie your physical real-world identity to your digital identity so that you cannot be truly anonymous online, even if hiding behind a pseudonym or, if you're completely anonymous, you will still need to have access via these kind of regulated channels, right, to give your ID. And okay, you can use VPNs, right? You can get around that trivially easily. But then the problem is they're going to start banning VPNs. They're going to make that illegal. They're going to do all sorts of things to ensure that everyone is incapable of speaking freely online without being worried about the Secret Service coming and knocking at their door and arresting them for posting a meme that somebody found offensive. And this is also why decentralized protocols for communication and social media like Nostr are so important, why you should absolutely, Frank Corva, our last guest, mentioned Nostr as well. You can find me there as well. You can go to primal.net/Walker, check out Primal or Damus to start using Nostr. This is why these decentralized open source protocols, which have dozens and dozens or hundreds of different end user applications built on top of them, are so important, because you don't need an email to sign up. You don't need an ID to sign up. And the end game of all of these regimes is ultimately to, again, connect your physical identity with your digital identity, and then to connect that digital identity with a social credit score, which is then tied into a central bank digital currency. We know the European Union and the European Central Bank is moving towards this. Christine Lagarde is a big fan of the digital euro and is clearly suffering from a severe bout of the totalitarian temptation. But this is why Bitcoin, uncensorable money, and pseudonymous money is so important. This is why Nostr, uncensorable pseudonymous communication, is so important. You need these tools because governments will only encroach further unless we do something, unless we stop, unless we actually defund this beast again by moving our economic energy outside of the extraction system and moving it into a parallel system where we can actually build towards a future of abundance. Rant done for now, but don't worry, you've still got another half hour of me ranting. We're going to go to a quick commercial break, then we're going to be back with a few more stories here on RoxomTV. Do not touch that dial. I'm Walker America, and we will be right back. Stay tuned.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the center of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're traveling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin?
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right? Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin! Come on, little buddy! Bitcoin! I need you! Don't go!
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. My name is Walker America. The price of Bitcoin is approximately 76,300 infinitely printable US dollars per coin. We're going to jump right into our next story, where Bitcoin has been somehow dragged into the Epstein files. Newly released Epstein files newly resurfaced Epstein files are circulating online, attempting to link Bitcoin to Jeffrey Epstein through alleged involvement with Adam Back and other Bitcoin developers, including claims of travel to Epstein's island. Now, Adam Back addressed these claims on February 1st, stating, quote, "In 2014, during Blockstream's seed round investor roadshow, the company was introduced to then MIT Media Lab director Joy Ito. Subsequently, Blockstream met with Jeffrey Epstein, who was described at the time as a limited partner in Ito's fund. The fund later invested a minority stake in Blockstream. A few months later, Ito's fund divested its Blockstream shares due to a potential conflict of interest and other concerns. Blockstream has no direct nor indirect financial connection with Jeffrey Epstein or his estate." Now, we'll be doing a deeper dive into this story tomorrow here on RoxomTV. However, it is very important to point out that Bitcoin is an open source protocol. Bitcoin is for enemies. Anyone can participate in supporting its development or invest in startups building in this space. It should not be surprising that powerful and wealthy individuals took interest in this technology, just as many others did. Jack Mallers also addressed the broader narrative today, saying, quote, "Bitcoin is a neutral, open source public utility, like fire, water, or the internet. Bitcoin is not a person. It is not an institution. Bitcoin has no secrets. Corrupt individuals do not get to rob humanity of its chance to fix the mess we inherited from the fiat system. Bitcoin is the solution, not the problem." Now, let's go ahead and roll this video of Jack Mallers so you can hear directly from him.
The last thing I will let happen to humanity is Jeffrey Epstein rob us humans of the invention that is Bitcoin. What is transpired with these email leaks and all of this data leak? Guys, it's very simple. The current system is disgusting. And for the future of our species and the future of our children, we have to fix it. We are battling the battle for human prosperity and the future for our kids. You have disgusting, pedophilic monsters running institutions, governments, countries making extremely important decisions. We have to burn this existing system to the ground. Listen, we did not have a say in what we inherited. I'm young. I did not have a say in the world I inherited. But I'll be damned if I don't have a say in the world that I build, in the world that my kids inherit. Bitcoin will work. Open source software and distributed systems will prosper. Bitcoin is an open source project, meaning We get to see and audit everything. We can look at the code. If they implemented a backdoor, if they implemented something that was nefarious and malicious and destructive, we'd be able to see it. Bitcoin is a public utility. It's open to the world. And so we can all see it. Bitcoin is well engineered and functioning, and it doesn't matter what emails get leaked. The open source code doesn't change. Was a bad person involved when fire was invented? It doesn't matter. Fire is a utility. People can benefit from fire. How good of a person were the early internet pioneers? Does anyone know? I guess the point is, Bitcoin's an open source utility. It's a neutral thing. It doesn't have feelings, emotions, intents. It's just a bunch of code that delivers a very useful utility, like water, like fire, like steel. The last thing I will let happen to humanity is Jeffrey Epstein rob us humans of the invention that is Bitcoin. That's the last thing I will do. Fuck these people. If I have to go on CNBC every single day to ensure that the public knows that that guy has nothing to do with the credibility of this invention and how monumental it is for all of us to be living in this time and making use of this technology, I will do that. I will be damned if this guy's emails from a decade ago get in the way of Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't give a shit, and neither should anybody else.
I say amen to that, Jack Mallers. He is one of the best voices on there out this to break these things down. And I couldn't agree more. And this is the reality here, that of course anyone can use Bitcoin. Of course, if Epstein was, allegedly involved with intelligence agencies, both domestic and foreign, of course they're interested in this. We also saw numerous emails where Epstein talks about, I'm forgetting exactly who it was with, so I don't want to accidentally slander somebody, but was talking about how you needed to look at ways to basically, destabilize Bitcoin for things that could be threats to Bitcoin, for other, cryptocurrencies to jump in there. He also shockingly drew the line at shitcoining, which is really just goes to say something about shitcoiners out there, but I digress. The point here is that Jack is exactly right. Bitcoin is an open source software project. Anyone can audit this code, and it is audited rigorously. It's probably one of the most audited code bases in the world because of the economic energy that it contains. And so there are no back doors to Bitcoin, no intelligence agency, or whether, again, it's domestic or foreign, put anything in there. And Bitcoin, again, just doesn't care. Bitcoin is how we get out from under the thumb of these disgusting elites who have clearly been just running roughshod over the rest of humanity. And again, this is the fiat system that propped up Jeffrey Epstein. Was he using Bitcoin to accept, to money from people to pay people? No, he was using J.P. Morgan Chase, as Jack Mallers, has called out, that they were Jeffrey Epstein's banker. They paid a fine on this. This is not speculation. They paid millions and millions of dollars in fines in the Virgin Islands to basically, to make amends for the fact that they were banking Epstein for years. Now, have we seen JP Morgan Chase get shut down after we know that they were literally laundering money for a pedophile, for a sex trafficker? No, they're still operating. They pay a little fine as a cost of doing business, and not a single person goes to jail. So that is the problem here. The problem is not a couple of emails showing that maybe some people had some contact with Jeffrey Epstein, right? This is a distraction from the larger point that this fiat system is so inherently broken, so disgusting and vile to its core, that it cannot let something like Bitcoin succeed, because Bitcoin holds up a mirror to that system and allows us to finally, as Jack said there, burn it down. We're going to jump over to our next story here today, and we've got a couple more here before we close out. This one is on Wall Street, buying the Bitcoin dip. Spot Bitcoin ETFs bought roughly $561.8 million worth of Bitcoin on Monday, February 2nd, snapping a multi-day outflow streak just as Bitcoin sold off sharply over the weekend. The biggest buyers were BlackRock's iShares Bitcoin Trust, IBIT, and Fidelity's Wise Origin Bitcoin Fund, FBTC, which together accounted for the large share of the inflows. Other participating funds included offerings from ARK Invest, 21 Shares, Bitwise, and VanEck. The buying came as Bitcoin dipped into the mid 70,000 range following a volatile weekend that triggered liquidations, shook out short-term traders, and briefly pushed Bitcoin to its lowest levels in weeks. While price action flushed tourists and leverage, Wall Street stepped in aggressively, treating the pullback as an accumulation opportunity, reinforcing the pattern we've seen all cycle. Institutions are buying volatility, not headlines. And this should also tell you something, right? As you are panicking, or hopefully not, perhaps you've achieved that Bitcoin Zen that is so elusive. As people panic, institutions are stepping in and they are buying. Ultimately, this thing is a one-way train ticket, right? Bitcoin is going to go up and to the right forever when measured in the poor measuring stick of fiat currency, right? There's 21 million Bitcoin. That's it. Over 95% have already been mined and have been issued into circulation. Most of that is currently sitting in cold storage, right? A lot of it has been lost. There is not enough Bitcoin to even give a half of the millionaires in the world. I think there's something like 60 million millionaires in the world. There's not enough Bitcoin for even every millionaire to have one, or for every millionaire to have half of a Bitcoin, right? Humans are not programmed to understand what absolute finite supply looks like, and that's what we have in Bitcoin. And ultimately, what we're going to see, now this pullback, it may be hard, as Frank said, we've been there. I remember I bought all the way up to the 2021 top and then all the way down to that bottom. Going down to that bottom hurts, but also as everybody else panics, that is your opportunity. Bitcoin ultimately shows us what happens when that old paradox is found out. And that paradox is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Well, we've not been able to figure out how to discern this paradox before, but ultimately Bitcoin shows us this. And we're going to see what happens in our lifetimes here today. But the unstoppable force is infinite fiat demand. They will always print more fiat. That is guaranteed. Fiat must debase. Fiat will debase. Fiat is and will continue to debase. That is certain. The other certainty is that Bitcoin is an unstoppable object, or a completely unstoppable force meets an immovable object. The immovable object is Bitcoin's 21 million supply. That's it, forever. You can get a piece of that pie now, or you can wait and have to spend more fiat on it later. Right now, it appears to be on sale. And I would suggest perhaps, again, not financial advice, but monetary advice, because Bitcoin is the best money. I would suggest getting a piece of that best money. It might make sense to get some just in case it catches on. But Bitcoin isn't just a store of value. It's also a medium of exchange. And we see the medium of exchange narrative playing out a lot more in foreign countries than we do here in the US. One of those is in Iran, where people have turned to both Bitcoin and crypto as we watch. Iran's use of Bitcoin and crypto is drawing increased scrutiny from US officials, however, according to an exclusive report from Reuters. Blockchain data from 2025 shows a sharp rise in Bitcoin and crypto flows linked to Iran, as citizens and businesses turn to alternative financial rails amid sanctions and limited access to global banking. On-chain analysts estimate that $7.8 to $10 billion in Bitcoin and crypto moved through Iran-linked channels in 2025. Activity has historically spiked during periods of inflation and currency pressure as capital controls continue to weigh on the Iranian rial. Bitcoin remains the dominant asset for everyday users. Data shows repeated surges in BTC withdrawals from local exchanges into self-custody wallets, behavior typically associated with long-term holding rather than speculation. Analysts say Bitcoin is increasingly used as a store of value and a censorship-resistant financial rail, that medium of exchange use case playing out when people need it the most. Alongside Bitcoin, USDT stablecoins are also used within the broader Bitcoin and crypto ecosystem, primarily for larger dollar-linked transfers and cross-border settlement. Blockchain researchers report hundreds of millions of dollars in USDT tied to Iranian-associated wallets in 2025, often linked to trading or institutional activity. Beyond exchanges, Iranian Bitcoiners Bitcoin users have increasingly referenced peer-to-peer tools that allow communication and payment coordination without traditional banking, like BitChat, a Bitcoin-enabled messaging app that uses Bluetooth mesh networking to enable decentralized communication and private transaction coordination without relying on the internet. We have previously covered this extensively on this show. They've also shown that you can use eCash over these BitChat mesh networks. While usage and data is a little bit difficult to quantify, these tools appear in environments where financial surveillance and platform access is constrained. Bitcoin was fundamentally built for moments like this. When fiat systems fracture, access to banking disappears, if it was ever there in the first place, and inflation erodes savings. Bitcoin offers an alternative, permissionless, censorship-resistant, and borderless payment and store of value mechanism. As history continues to show, when traditional money fails, Bitcoin doesn't ask for permission, it just works. And again, that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin, is that nobody needs permission to use it. Nobody can stop you from using the Bitcoin network. You can't stop anyone else from using it. Bitcoin is money for enemies. But ultimately, everyone from a dictator down to a humble pleb can go ahead and use Bitcoin. Unfortunately, dictators don't seem to like Bitcoin very much because it completely subverts their totalitarian states. Ultimately, what we're going to see play out in the world is in places where the fiat rails break down, and they are breaking. Please be warned, they are breaking everywhere. They're just breaking in some places faster. Hyperinflation is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. And that's what we see happening in countries like Iran, in Venezuela, in Argentina, in Turkey, all over the place. We see the fiat currency system breaking down because that's what it always does. When you print money out of thin air, ultimately that money will turn to its marginal cost of production, which is zero. And when you don't even need to print it, that value is, the marginal cost of production is truly zero. It's just a few keystrokes on a computer inside the central bank, just marking up the balance sheets, right? So Bitcoin is truly made for this moment in history. We are very lucky to be alive at this place in space and time and witnessing what happened before Bitcoin and what happens after Bitcoin. My son's born into a world where Bitcoin already exists. Everybody born since Bitcoin was fully released to the public lives in a post-Bitcoin world. They don't know the world before, but we shouldn't forget it or let them forget. We must remain vigilant. We must ensure that we do not let the next generations forget about the evils of fiat currency, about the extractive nature of these fiat currency systems, about the ultimate societal destruction that happens every single time currencies fail. And every fiat currency ultimately fails. Everyone has in history, and everyone will as we move forward. More will spring up again and again, I'm sure, because the temptation to be close to that money printer and to get those freshly minted new currency units off of there is just too damn strong for most people to resist. But now we have a way for us lowly people who aren't in the pedophilic elite to resist that fiat system. We have Bitcoin. We have cryptography. We have encrypted messaging applications. We have peer-to-peer messaging and communication tools, BitChat, Nostr, Fedimint, Fedi, eCash. We have all of these different tools to transact and communicate privately and peer-to-peer. These tools are going to become increasingly important and useful, not just for people halfway across the world in Iran, not just for people in Venezuela, not just for people in Turkey, for people in America, for people in the United Kingdom, for people in the supposed developed world, the so-called Western world. These tools are important for you now, whether you realize it or not, and they will become direly important for you before you know it. You need to learn how to use these tools. It's why we cover them extensively here on Roxom, not just because it's an interesting story, but because these tools will ultimately be your greatest lifeline. They are your greatest chance to be able to step out from under the oppressive yoke of this extractive fiat currency system and the surveillance totalitarian panopticon that we find ourselves sleepwalking into. We're going to continue covering these stories on RoxomTV here every single day. You can hear them from me every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I also join our other Roxom host, Hank, on Thursdays and Fridays here a couple hours earlier. So do tune in for that as well. And I guess I would just leave you with this. It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. It's becoming increasingly clear that we need Bitcoin, if that wasn't clear to you already. It's becoming clear to more and more people. It should become clear as well that you need encrypted communication tools, that you need encrypted and peer-to-peer communication tools to be able to coordinate, to be able to actually resist authoritarian, totalitarian overreach from an ever-growing, bloated, kleptocratic state. You need to learn how to use these tools. They're not even that hard to use. You know, we're living in a generation now with Gen Z and Gen Alpha behind them. They're digitally 100% native. They don't even remember life before Wi-Fi, right? They don't remember the computer voice screeching at you with dial-up, right? That's a distant memory logged somewhere in their subconscious, perhaps, and they heard about it on an old TV show once. But we live in a digitally native generations now with Gen Z and Gen Alpha and the ones that will come after them. They automatically get how this stuff works. But you, if you're like me, you're a millennial or older, even if you're a boomer, you should learn how this stuff works. I know you bought your house for a bushel of raspberries back in 1971, and now it's worth $5 million. But that doesn't mean that you actually own that house. You rent it from the government, and the government is getting ever larger and ever more greedy no matter where you live. I would hope that, as we've heard here today from Kyle and from Frank, that we're actually able to move forward with deregulating our government here in America as much as possible, shrinking the size of this bloated, geriatric, kleptocratic apparatus, because it needs to shrink. This isn't sustainable. The fiat currency system isn't sustainable. They must continue to print. They can't balance a budget. The government shuts down every couple of months because they can't agree on all the different sweetheart deals that are going to get thrown into the next omnibus bill. Most of the politicians don't actually care at all about working for their citizens, about protecting the freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, and instead they care about protecting themselves and enriching themselves, as we have seen time and time again. But there is a change coming. The change already came, in fact. We already separated money from state with Bitcoin. Satoshi gave us that gift. He separated money from state, the creation of money and the control of money from the state. Now, it's our job to keep it separated. And as long as Bitcoin remains decentralized and secure, we've got a darn good shot at leaving our children a much better world than the one we found. So I'll leave you with that today. Thank you guys for joining me here on RoxomTV. Again, you can make sure to follow our guests from today's show, Kyle Olney and Frank Corva. I'll be here every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on RoxomTV. Thank you so much for sharing your scarce time with me today. I appreciate everybody who tunes in. Make sure to follow RoxomTV, follow me, Walker America. Check out Nostr. I use Primal and Damus every single day on Nostr. You can check them out. Go to primal.net/Walker if you want to find me there. Thank you all again for sharing your scarce time. Stay vigilant out there. Learn how to use these tools. And remember, as we said already, Bitcoin was made for this moment. Thanks so much. I'll see you next week.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling